Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. I share real-life stories about experiences with beings from beyond our world. These stories are designed to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into today's story. For over a decade, I'd been flying small aircraft, mostly doing charter and sightseeing trips. On this particular afternoon, everything seemed routine. I was making a short flight from Billings to a private airstrip near Sheridan. The day was cold and clear, with a thin layer of high clouds casting a washed-out silvery light typical of winter. About 30 minutes before landing, something caught my eye. Initially, I thought it was just an unusual break in the clouds catching sunlight, but then it moved. A metallic disc dropped vertically from the cloud layer, perfectly straight, no tilting or wobbling. It stopped mid-air for a brief moment, then shot horizontally and vanished into the mountain haze. No sound, no contrail, nothing. My mind raced. Was it another aircraft from an odd angle? But no, there were no wings. The object was too smooth, too precise. I checked my instruments, expecting something to go wrong, but everything remained normal. I landed without incident and taxied toward the hangar. That's when I saw two men standing in the building's shadow. Both wore identical black suits, white shirts, and dark ties, no coats, despite the freezing 25-degree temperature. One was tall and lean, the other shorter and broader. Both looked pale, as if they hadn't seen sunlight in months. They didn't approach immediately. Instead, they watched me shut down the engine and climb out. Then the taller one stepped forward. Mr. Taller One stepped forward. "Harlan," he said in a flat, almost robotic voice. The shorter man held a clipboard with several papers. "We'd like a moment of your time," the shorter one stated. "We understand you observed an aerial anomaly on your approach." I was stunned. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen. I hadn't even decided what to call it myself. "I saw something," I stammered. "I'm not sure what." "That's exactly why we're here," the taller one replied. The quiet airstrip felt strange. No fuel truck driver, no usual arrival handler, just emptiness. Two men approached me with a clipboard, their demeanor precise and controlled. The shorter one stepped closer, his eyes an unnatural, uniform gray. "Federal jurisdiction," he said when I asked about their agency. The statement hung in the air like a final verdict. Wind ruffled the hangar doors behind them, amplifying the sense of isolation. I hesitated over the form. Small, dense text caught my eye. "Atmospheric interference and no threat to flight safety" were the only clear words. Something felt off. "I saw a metallic object," I said slowly. The taller man interrupted. "You saw atmospheric interference." It wasn't a question. His tone carried a strange weight, as if my agreement was already assumed. The shorter man moved closer, close enough that I could see tiny details in his irises. "The object you saw was not metallic," he corrected me. "It was atmospheric interference." I glanced toward the dark terminal where silence surrounded me. No engines, no voices, just the wind and these two men. The taller one extended the clipboard again. "Please sign, Mr. Self-Resent Harlan." Something inside me just wanted to escape this moment. I signed without reading, my pen moving almost involuntarily. The shorter man snatched the paper instantly, tucking it under his arm. They stepped back in perfect synchronization, as if our entire interaction was a rehearsed performance. No goodbye, no handshake, just a slight nod from the taller man before they disappeared into the hangar's shadowed interior. Curious, I followed, but the hangar was empty. No doors, no trace, just silence. The plane's engine started in the distance, breaking the stillness. The night was cold and clear, with stars spread across the sky like pinpricks of light. I was out on the porch, sipping tea and unwinding as I often do. Living on the town's edge means quiet evenings where every sound carries. Something caught my eye, a star that didn't behave like the others. It drifted and stopped, moved sideways, then paused again. Not racing, but purposeful. I watched for a full minute, feeling my stomach tighten when it arced perfectly around another star, then halted as if checking its position. I chuckled, thinking fatigue was playing tricks. But then the star began to glow brighter, subtly intensifying. When I turned to set down my mug, I looked back to find it completely vanished. Not faded, just gone. The next morning at the cafe, everything seemed ordinary. I opened up at 6 o'clock, wiping tables between sparse morning customers. Small town mornings are like that, quiet, predictable. Then the bell rang. 2 men entered wearing identical black suits, the crisp, funeral-ready kind. Black fedoras topped their heads, and they wore no coats despite the freezing temperature. Without acknowledging me, they walked directly to a booth and sat down, hats firmly in place. Later, at the airfield, everything felt strangely normal. My ground crew approached, asking about fuel. When I mentioned the 2 men from earlier, he looked confused, saying no one had been around all day. I didn't argue. I fueled up and left. Only later did I realize my flight log was missing. The notepad gone, though my pen remained exactly where I'd left it. I never saw those men again. I was working the morning shift at the cafe when 2 silent customers caught my attention. They sat in a booth, completely motionless, facing forward. At first, I thought they might be waiting for someone, so I left them alone after offering menus. Something felt off. Every time I moved around the cafe, I noticed one of them subtly turning his head, tracking my movements. Not overtly staring, but just enough to make my skin crawl. Local customers would glance at their booth and quickly look away, seeming uncomfortable. When Chelsea arrived to take over the shift, she gave me a questioning look. I shrugged it off. As I was preparing to leave and pouring my coffee, I witnessed something strange. The man inside the booth leaned slightly toward his companion, not whispering but listening. His companion's lips barely moved, as if speaking without sound. An odd pressure filled my ears, similar to standing too close to a subwoofer. When I turned back after putting the lid on my coffee, both men were staring directly at me, unblinking, emotionless. I left quickly. Outside, their black SUV was parked right in front of the cafe. I hadn't heard it arrive. The windows were impossibly dark. As I walked to my truck, I noticed movement. Both men now stood in the cafe doorway, perfectly synchronized, watching me. I started driving, checking my rearview mirror. They stood on the sidewalk as I pulled away. At the first stop sign, I looked back. The SUV was now following me, slowly rolling out of the parking lot. I was on night shift at Clear Falls State Park, which mostly meant checking that the gates were locked, patrolling the campground once or twice and sitting in the truck with the radio on low. It was early October, about a week after the summer crowds had died down. Nights were quiet that time of year, too quiet sometimes. Around 9:40 p.m., the ranger station phone rang. Darren, who ran the bait shop in town, was on the line. He'd just had 2 different fishermen come in, both rattled. They'd seen strange lights over the lake about half an hour earlier. One claimed it looked like a lantern drifting under the water but moving too fast. The other said it was more like a spotlight shining straight up from below. Darren figured it might be poachers or somebody messing around, so he thought I should know. I signed out the keys for the truck, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out. The lake was about a 10-minute drive from the station. It was a calm night, just a slight breeze, and the moon was barely a sliver. The air smelled like wet leaves. When I got near the turnoff to the North Shore lot, I noticed a car parked just inside the access road. Black sedan, no plates that I could see. It was angled so the headlights pointed toward the trees, not the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was a visitor who got lost. Then I saw 2 men standing on the path that led down to the water. They were facing the lake, still as fence posts. Both wore dark suits. Not jackets you'd wear hiking, but press-tailored suits and wide-brimmed hats that made it hard to see their faces. They weren't holding fishing rods, cameras, nothing. I stayed a couple cars back, never speeding, never getting too close. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, but they followed me all the way to the edge of town. When I turned onto the county road, they went straight. That night, I went out on the porch again, half expecting to see that star moving around like before. The sky was clear, the same as the night before, but that spot where I'd first seen it was empty. For weeks after, I kept thinking I saw the SUV parked on side streets or in the grocery store lot, but it was always far enough away that I couldn't be sure. They never came back into the cafe. But sometimes when I'm outside late, I get the same tight feeling in my ears, like that low-pressure hum is just under the quiet. I pulled up and got out, boots crunching on the gravel. 2 figures turned simultaneously, their movements so perfectly synchronized it seemed rehearsed. One stepped forward, his voice deep and completely flat. "You'll need to return to the station," he said with zero emotion. I explained I was the on-duty ranger responding to reports of lights on the lake. "This location is under federal jurisdiction tonight," he responded, tone unchanged. When I asked them to identify themselves, the second man quickly showed something that looked like an ID wallet. I caught a fleeting glimpse of a seal, maybe an eagle, but it vanished before I could confirm. "We don't usually have federal officers here without notice," I said. "Notice has been given," came the reply. When I asked who was notified, he simply stared, not angrily, not impatiently, just stared, waiting for me to stop talking. The silence grew until I could hear wind moving branches overhead. Something felt fundamentally wrong, not threatening exactly, but like walking into a room where everyone knows something you don't. The sensation was unsettling. "All right, I'll call this in," I finally said. "You will not." The first man immediately responded. Glancing toward the water, I noticed an odd light rippling about 100 yards out. No moon, no boat. It seemed to be coming from beneath the surface. When I looked back, both men were watching me intently, waiting to see my next move. I suddenly wanted to leave. Not out of fear, but because I felt I wasn't supposed to witness whatever was happening. I nodded, said, "All right," and walked back to my truck. They didn't follow or move. The black sedan remained parked, engine off, no lights. Back at the station, I sat at my desk and stared at the phone for a long time. I didn't call anyone. Around midnight, I decided to swing back toward the lake, figuring maybe they'd be gone by then. When I got there, the sedan was gone and the shoreline was empty. No light on the water, no footprints on the gravel. The air felt colder than it had earlier, but that could have just been the temperature drop. The next morning, I asked a couple of the other rangers if anyone had gotten word about federal officers visiting the park. Nobody had. I checked the incident logs. Nothing. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Darren's bait shop and asked if he'd heard any more about those lights. He gave me a look like I'd said something strange and told me he didn't know what I was talking about. I reminded him about the call he made to me the night before, but he just shook his head and said, I must have been thinking of someone else. I didn't push it. That night, when I drove past the lake on my way home, I slowed down at the North Shore turnoff. It was empty. No sedan, no figures, nothing but dark trees and the sound of crickets. I kept driving without stopping. It was late February, one of those grey weeks where the sun never seems to show up, and I'd been pulling long nights in the meteorology lab at school. As a senior majoring in atmospheric science, my advisor had given me permission to use some archive satellite imagery for my thesis. Most of it was boring. Jet streams, cloud formations, the occasional hurricane spiraling out in the Pacific. But I liked the work. The lab was quiet after dark and I could get into a rhythm without anyone bothering me. One Tuesday night, I was going through some infrared images from a NOAA satellite feed. They were time-stamped and geotagged like usual. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something odd. There was a series of frames over the Midwest that showed a perfect circular heat signature in the middle of otherwise normal cloud cover. It wasn't huge, maybe a couple miles across, but it stood out. The thing didn't move with the clouds. Frame after frame, it just and then between two captures, maybe 30 seconds apart, it was gone. No dispersal, no drift, just vanished. I flagged the files and kept going. The next set was from a week earlier. Different region entirely, somewhere over the coast of Maine. Same thing, perfect circle, completely stationary, gone in under a minute. I first noticed something odd during my late-night satellite monitoring. A strange thermal signature appeared over Nevada, completely invisible in regular light. Intrigued, I started digging deeper. At first, I thought it might just be a technical glitch, but more evidence quickly emerged. Over several nights, I found 7 similar instances stretching back 2 years. Each time, the images showed perfectly round objects, completely motionless, vanishing within seconds. By 3 a.m. on Thursday, I had almost 30 documented examples. Something felt different, like I'd uncovered a pattern nobody else had noticed. When I returned to the lab the next day, a sticky note from doctor to stay, sticky note from doctor to Prives. Larkin, my advisor, demanded I see him. His phone call seemed tense, with a clipped tone that suggested something serious. Shortly after, 2 men arrived, both impeccably dressed in black suits that looked freshly pressed, with shoes polished to a shine. The tall, pale man with sharp features spoke my name like an inquiry. His companion was shorter, broader, with darker skin. Neither looked like typical university visitors. Their approach was direct and almost mechanical. Without introducing themselves or showing identification, they demanded to see my workstation. The shorter man sat at my terminal, quickly navigating to the folder where I'd been storing my mysterious findings. His movements were swift and purposeful, as if he already knew exactly what he was looking for. 2 men walked into the lab, moving with a cold efficiency that immediately set me on edge. Without hesitation, the tall one began opening files on the computer, glancing at each one for barely a second before dragging them to the recycle bin. I started to speak, but he cut me off before I could get a word out. His companion emptied the recycle bin and systematically cleared the system log. and cloud backups. They worked in perfect sync, as if this was a routine they'd performed countless times before. My backups were no longer even under my own account. When they finished, they turned and looked directly at me. "You will not attempt to recover these," the tall one stated. It wasn't a question or a request. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. They left without another word, heading down the side corridor toward the old geology wing under renovation. I followed, but by the time I rounded the corner, they had vanished. No sound of doors, no trace of movement. Back at my desk, I discovered my USB drive had been wiped clean as well. Every file, every note, gone, as if they had never existed. Dr. Larkin arrived later, casually assigning me a new data set and telling me to focus on that before walking away. That night, I worked late in the lab, keeping the lights low and concentrating on the new assignment. Around 1 a.m., I went to the vending machine. When I returned, a folded piece of paper sat on my keyboard, simply saying, "Stop." The hallway was empty, the building silent, except for the air vent's steady hum. For the rest of the semester, I never saw them again. I stopped investigating the satellite frames and never spoke about what I'd discovered. But occasionally, when walking across campus late at night, I'd catch a glimpse of a black sedan parked nearby. Mid-November brought a clear, cold morning, where frost lingered even after sunrise. I was out past Dry Creek on the old logging road, rifle in hand, but wandering more than hunting. This part of the forest stays quiet, with only occasional crow calls breaking the silence. Snowmobile tracks had long since disappeared, and I'd veered off the main path toward a hidden clearing I knew from previous wanderings. My boots crunched through frost-covered ground as I searched for deer signs. Something about the light caught my attention. At first I thought it was a heat shimmer, but my breath hung visible in the cold air. Then I noticed something odd. The air in the clearing center seemed bent, like looking through rippling water at a river's bottom. There it was. About 20 feet up, a stretched oval hung suspended. Its surface looked like liquid metal, perfectly reflecting the surrounding trees. So seamless was its camouflage that I would have missed it entirely, if not for a slight movement. No spinning, no swaying, just hovering silently. I stood motionless, listening. No wind rustled the branches, no birds chirped, not even a distant highway hum disturbed the stillness. Time seemed to stretch, maybe a minute, maybe 5, with no sound from the object. When I shifted my weight, everything changed. The surface rippled like a stone dropped in a pond, tilting subtly toward me. An inexplicable feeling washed over me. It had noticed me. My stomach dropped. Keeping my eyes locked on the object, I backed toward the tree line, heart pounding in my ears. I planned to circle back to the logging road and return to my truck. Halfway there, the forest silence transformed. The quiet became oppressive, the air feeling thick and heavy. I gripped my rifle, every sense alert. I had the night shift at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, a massive place with 15 loading bays, a small office block, and about 3 acres of fenced-in lot. Just after 2 in the morning, something caught my eye on the cameras. Weeks earlier, I'd been out hunting in the woods, my finger just outside the trigger guard. Rounding a bend in the trail, I suddenly saw them, 2 men standing side by side in the middle of the path. They wore black suits, long coats and hats that looked completely out of place in the woods. Their clothes were immaculate, not a single speck of frost or dirt despite the muddy trail. They didn't look at my rifle or even directly at my face. It was more like they were looking through me. One stepped forward and I noticed his shoes, polished black leather, perfectly clean. "You've gone off limits," he said in a flat, oddly rhythmic voice with no discernible accent. My mouth went dry. I tried to glance past them, wondering if I could push through the trees, but something about their stance made me stop. The second man spoke. "Turn around. Use another route." I attempted to play dumb, claiming I was just out deer hunting and didn't know about any boundaries. They didn't react. No blinking, no movement. When I hesitated, they both took a precise step forward in unison, as if they'd rehearsed the motion. That was enough for me. I muttered, "All right," and backed up, turning away. I didn't run, but I walked fast, taking a long route through thicker trees until I reached the main road. I kept expecting to hear footsteps, but there was nothing. Back at my truck, I found a thin layer of frost on the windshield, though it had been clear that morning. My phone, which I'd used earlier, was completely dead. I assumed the cold had drained the battery, but when I plugged it in at home, it powered on normally, still showing 62% charge. I thought about returning to the clearing the next day, but the weather report predicted heavy snow in that area for the rest of the week. I never went back, and I don't hunt alone anymore. My job at the security station was pretty basic. Watch monitors, log truck arrivals, and do occasional walk-rounds. Most nights were dead quiet. That particular night was clear and cold, with wind gusting intermittently. Nothing serious enough to trigger the motion sensors. I was nursing a cup of stale coffee when something caught my eye on camera 12, the screen covering the far corner of the southern yard. Only dim perimeter lights illuminated the area. At first I thought the image was glitching, but leaning closer, I realized something was different. A shape sat low behind the far fence line near the trees. Something that wasn't a truck or anything familiar. It didn't cast shadows like it should have. Instead, the object emitted a soft, pulsing, whitish glow. I scrutinized the screen, wondering if it might be a neighbor's odd lamp or a lens reflection, but no. The shape remained solid and stationary. Checking other cameras confirmed my suspicion. It only appeared on camera 12 with views from 13 and 14 blocked by storage containers. My instinct was to snap a photo with my phone, but something held me back. I watched, transfixed, for about half a minute. Then the glow subtly shifted, as if tilting or rotating, yet absolutely no sound accompanied the movement. At that distance, any truck or machinery would have produced some noise. In less than a blink, the object vanished. Completely. No fade, no movement, just gone. I was still staring at the empty yard when the front gate camera suddenly showed motion. An unmarked, dark van pulled up outside the security office. This was unprecedented. We never get unannounced visitors, especially not in an unmarked vehicle at 2 a.m. Two men emerged, both wearing identical black suits with white shirts and black ties. They didn't resemble truck drivers or inspectors. The taller man had a narrow face and skin so pale it appeared almost grey under the security lights. His companion kept his head lowered, seemingly studying the ground. Neither smiled. When I buzzed the intercom and asked if I could help them, the tall man looked directly at the camera and spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "We need access to the southern loading bay." His statement stopped me in my tracks. The southern loading bay was an old, forgotten section hidden behind newer expansions. No one used it anymore, and we kept it locked tight. I'd never heard anyone talk about it except management and security. When two men showed up demanding access, something felt off. They were unnaturally still, just standing there waiting. The shorter one had eyes that didn't catch the light, flat and dark in a way I'd never seen before. I told them I needed to call my supervisor, but the taller one claimed they'd already spoken to him. I knew that wasn't true. Dennis, our on-call supervisor, lived 2 towns away and would have told me about any incoming visitors. Every instinct warned me not to let them in. They didn't look like guys you could easily argue with. When I said I couldn't grant access without clearance and reached for the phone, they simply turned and walked back to their van. No threats, no debate, just smooth, silent movement. The van pulled away without headlights, rolling down the access road until darkness swallowed it. I switched to the road cameras, but they never appeared. Strange, because that road only has 2 turns before hitting the highway. When I checked camera 12, the yard was empty and still. Every sound made me jump for the rest of my shift. No more vans came, no strange shapes appeared behind the fence. When Dennis arrived at 6 to take over, I told him about the encounter. He looked at me like I was joking. Nobody had called, and no visitors were logged. We checked the gate camera feed. The recording for that time slot was completely gone, a corrupted file. The system said every other camera worked fine except camera 12, which went black for about 4 minutes right after I saw a strange glow. After that, I kept quiet, but sometimes when I'm working the night shift, I catch myself looking toward that far corner, half expecting to see that pale light pulsing in the darkness. The day was growing late, winter's chill making my breath visible in the crisp air. I was perched about 20 feet up in the bucket, replacing a cracked insulator on a remote rural power line. The job site was isolated, just open fields and a narrow dirt road with no nearby houses and only the occasional farm truck passing by. My partner Dale was back in the truck handling paperwork, and I could hear him rustling through inspection logs while I worked. The only sound was the wind threading through the electrical wires, until it wasn't. A low, steady hum caught my attention, reminiscent of a distant refrigerator. But out here, there was nothing that could generate such a sound. When I turned, I saw it hovering over the eastern fields. Not high up, maybe a couple 100 feet, it hung perfectly still. Oval-shaped and dark against the pale sky, it had a strange shimmer like heat rising from summer asphalt. It wasn't a plane or helicopter. No blades, no wings, no engine noise. just that persistent hum vibrating the air. As I reached for my radio, the hum abruptly stopped. Dead silence. The object tilted slightly, then shot straight up, vanishing into the cloud cover. I stared at the empty sky for several seconds before hearing gravel crunching below. A sleek black SUV with no front plates rolled to a stop directly beneath my lift. Two men emerged, identical in black suits, white shirts, and black ties, same height and build, looking like they could be brothers. The first one shaded his eyes and motioned for me to come down. I hesitated. We were on a public road, but I wasn't expecting company. These men didn't look like typical utility workers. No hard hats, no company logos. The second man spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Sir, we need you to come down." It wasn't a request. As I lowered the bucket, the first man stepped forward the moment I touched ground. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Up close, his skin was pale, almost grey, with features that were somehow too smooth, too perfect. Dale and I were fixing an insulator out past the edge of town on a clear, cold day. The wind cut across the fields, sharp and biting. I noticed two men approaching, their presence somehow off-kilter. The first man's face seemed strange. Not quite right. He asked if everything was working okay, and I nodded. Then things got weird. The second man positioned himself to block my view of Dale, who was still in the truck's cab. The first man's voice remained calm but carried an underlying tension. "If you saw something in the sky, it's important you tell us for your own safety," he said. I claimed I didn't know what they were talking about. Neither man wore a coat, which struck me as bizarre given the 30-degree temperature. They seemed unaffected by the cold, standing there in thin suits like the freezing wind meant nothing. "We appreciate your cooperation," the first man said, effectively ending the conversation. They drove off in their SUV, smooth and silent, leaving no dust trail. When I climbed into the truck, I asked Dale what that was about. To my shock, he claimed he hadn't seen anyone. He said he'd heard a vehicle pull up, but when he looked, the road was empty. We finished the job in silence. During the drive back, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that SUV trailing us. That night was different. It reminded me of another recent incident. Julie and I had been driving back from my sister's place, coming off Route 19. The moon was bright, casting shadows across the road. Something passed across that moon, solid and perfectly circular, not clouds. Something else entirely. Every time I close my eyes, I can picture that dark shape hanging over the fields, and I keep hearing this persistent hum. I thought about calling someone, my boss, maybe even the sheriff, but what would I say? Two weird guys told me not to talk about something I supposedly didn't see. Something was definitely not right. The moonlight flickered back after something moved slowly enough to block it. Julie and I both noticed her hands gripping the wheel tightly. She didn't speak, and I didn't either. The road felt emptier than usual, which wasn't saying much, since it was never busy at night. By the time we reached our street's turnoff, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe just a weirdly lit plane or a bird closer than it seemed. But then we pulled into the driveway and saw him. A black Lincoln sat just outside our drive's entrance. The man leaned against it wearing a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. No coat, despite his breath visible in the cold air. He stared toward the tree line, not looking at us initially. When he turned, his movement was precise, like an actor hitting a mark perfectly. His face was pale and thin, without facial hair or glasses. His eyes were dark, not just in color, but dark in a way that seemed to absorb all light. Julie slowed almost to a stop. As she rolled forward, he stepped toward her window. "You enjoy the show too?" he asked, his voice low and flat, completely disconnected from his blank expression. Neither of us responded immediately. Julie seemed uncertain, maybe thinking he meant something else. Local fireworks or an event we didn't know about. He waited, staring. "What show?" Julie finally asked. His mouth twitched briefly, almost a smile. "The one you just saw," he said, as if correcting her, implying she'd already acknowledged something. My stomach dropped. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat was dry. Julie put the car in park. Suddenly I realized the absolute stillness. No crickets, no wind, just a muted background of silence. For the first time he looked directly at me. His gaze locked onto me, unmoving. I was driving back from my cousin Matt's place in Belford, taking County Road 16 instead of the main highway. Late at night, just after 11 o'clock, I loved how quiet the road was. No streetlights, just a long stretch of dark with occasional mailboxes. The cold, clear night had my heat on low, and the window cracked. Wood smoke from someone's stove drifted through the air. My mind wandered aimlessly, soft music playing, and a vague thought about an early morning ahead. 8 or 9 miles past town, something caught my eye. A perfectly straight column of white light shot up from the ground into the sky in a field to the left. This wasn't like a searchlight or flashlight beam. It was narrow, solid-looking, and brighter than anything I'd ever seen. Stunned, I slowed down, staring through the driver's side window. The light lasted maybe 3 seconds before snapping off, leaving nothing but darkness. No afterglow, no smoke, no sound. I pulled over just past a gravel driveway and killed my headlights, half expecting the light to reappear. The field was black now, with only a faint outline of trees in the distance. Something felt wrong, like I was intruding on something I shouldn't see. I hesitated, debating whether to turn into the driveway for a closer look. This part of the county was just farmland and old barns. Nobody would be out here this late. I kept going. My speed reduced to about 35. The mirrors became my constant companions, checking repeatedly. The road behind me remained empty. Julie pulled up the driveway fast later that night. We sat in the garage, both of us scanning the mirrors. The street was silent. The next morning, I went out early to get the paper. 2 sets of tire tracks marked the shoulder where the car had been parked, but no footprints disturbed the frost, not even our own from the night before. The man had stepped back from the car, walking backwards to the black Lincoln without turning around. He slid into the driver's side door with practiced precision, never looking down. When he'd asked if we had any questions, I'd shaken my head involuntarily. "Good," he'd said. I rolled down the highway, cresting a small rise when the tail lights appeared ahead. They seemed oddly positioned, wide and low like an older model car. As I approached, I realized the vehicle wasn't moving. A black sedan sat sideways, blocking both lanes. No markings, just the faint glow of brake lights. I slowed to a crawl, maybe 10 miles an hour, inching closer until about 30 feet away. 2 men stood precisely positioned, one near each headlight. Dark suits, white shirts, no ties. They weren't speaking or looking at each other. Both stared directly at me. The man on the left raised his arm slowly, making a deliberate circular motion with his hand. His companion remained completely still. "Is everything all right?" I called out, my voice oddly loud in the cold air. No response came. The man with the raised arm continued his repetitive gesture. I wondered if an accident blocked the road or a fallen tree lay ahead, but no debris or emergency lights were visible. Something felt wrong. The men's symmetrical stance made my neck prickle. This wasn't a typical traffic stop. It felt choreographed, staged. My instincts screamed to leave. Slowly, I shifted into reverse and backed up until I could turn onto a side road I'd passed earlier. In my rearview mirror, they remained frozen in position. The side road wound through farmland, eventually reconnecting with County Road 16 about 4 miles further on. Returning to the main road, I searched for any sign of the car or men. Nothing, just empty pavement under my headlights. I drove faster, nerves frayed, until seeing another vehicle at the county line. At home, I sat in the driveway, engine running, unsure who I could tell. How could I explain 2 silent men in suits blocking the road? The next day, I retraced my route in daylight. The field where I'd seen the strange light was now just bare dirt and weeds. No tracks, no equipment, no evidence anything unusual had occurred. The evening hike was taking longer than I'd planned. The sun was already low behind the hills, casting long shadows through the trees. As I walked down the fire road that loops around the ridge, the air grew heavy and still, signaling the approach of darkness. Every step crunched loudly against the gravel. Halfway down the trail, I paused to drink some water. A sudden glint caught my eye across the valley, a quick silver flash between the branches. It wasn't sunlight, but something reflective that vanished almost instantly. I stared, waiting for it to reappear, but nothing moved. Continuing down the narrowing trail, I heard only my footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, something changed. Low rolling tires on gravel approached from behind. I turned to see a black SUV creeping along the trail, unusual for this fire road, which was typically gated off to vehicles. The SUV was pristine, spotless, despite the dusty road. Its windows were so darkly tinted that I couldn't see inside. I slowed down, expecting it to pass, but it maintained a consistent distance of about 40 or 50 feet behind me. When I moved to the side and waved it forward, the vehicle slowed even more but didn't overtake me. With no phone service, I felt increasingly uneasy. The driver's side window rolled down halfway, revealing two men in black suits, white shirts, and black ties. They looked completely out of place on this remote hiking trail at dusk. Earlier that evening, I'd noticed something else strange. A black sedan had been parked at the end of my street. No front plate, windows too dark to see through. When I checked again just minutes later, it had vanished without a trace. I was wrapping up my usual late-night talk show about local mysteries and weird news just past midnight. The station was quiet, with only the hum of equipment and air conditioner breaking the silence. Around 12:17 a.m., a call came through that stood out from the trickle of earlier ones. The voice was calm, almost monotone, but carried an unmistakable tension, as if the caller was trying not to be overheard. "Hello," I said. "You're on the air." "Yeah," the guy responded. "I need to describe something I saw. I don't know who else to tell." My mind flashed back to the strange encounter on the ridge just days earlier. A pale driver with short, dark hair and his silent passenger had rolled up beside me in an SUV, asking if I'd seen anything unusual. I'd said no, not mentioning the silver flash I'd glimpsed. They'd tracked my every move down the trail, always just far enough ahead that I couldn't see their faces. The silence was eerie, no birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of tires and my own footsteps. When we reached the parking area, they pulled aside, watching me as I hurried to my car. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror. The SUV remained parked. Then, just as I turned the last corner leading back to town, it pulled out and headed back up the trail I'd just descended. I haven't returned to that ridge since. The encounter had been unsettling, their precise movements, the calculated way they followed me, the complete lack of explanation. Something about it felt deliberate, controlled, like I was part of some unknown script I couldn't comprehend. In the dead of night, a caller described an encounter near an old quarry just outside town. His voice trembled as he spoke about a disc-shaped object hovering in a clearing. First, he mentioned the light, soft white circles rotating slowly, unlike any aircraft's blinking pattern. Then he detailed its impossible movement, barely perceptible at first, before accelerating in ways that defied logic. The shadows beneath the object were even more unsettling. They reflected the surrounding trees, but in patterns that shifted impossibly fast. I listened intently, scribbling notes while trying to suppress my skepticism. The entire encounter, he said, lasted barely 10 minutes before the object simply vanished. No sound, no dramatic takeoff, just gone. When he returned to his car, the gravel around the clearing looked untouched, as if nothing had occurred. After hanging up, I remained at the microphone reviewing the recording and my notes. An eerie sensation of being watched crept over me, despite the empty station. I attributed it to the late hour and an overactive imagination fueled by too many strange stories. The next morning, everything changed. Two men in identical black suits were waiting in the lobby when I arrived. They didn't quite fit in, standing out through their very blandness. Without introduction, they asked for me directly, their request crisp and rehearsed. "We need the recording from last night, for archiving purposes." In the back office, I attempted to retrieve the file. But something was wrong. The recording had vanished completely. I had backed everything up just hours earlier. Yet now, nothing remained. No trace in the server, no fragments in the trash, no partial files. The taller man leaned closer, watching my increasingly frantic search. "Archiving?" I asked, my voice betraying a growing unease. The shorter man, older and bespectacled, stood silently. His glasses reflected the harsh fluorescent lights as his hands remained precisely folded. "It's crucial we have the original," he said simply. The front door clicked shut, and I finally exhaled, feeling like I'd been holding my breath for hours. The entire encounter had lasted barely 7 minutes, but something about those men had my chest tightening. They were too calm, too precise, not threatening exactly, but deliberate in a way that set me on edge. Earlier, they had come about a recording, checked my screen, and left their cards with a polite note to contact them if anything else came up. No arguments, no demands, just an unsettling visit that left me questioning everything. I tried to rationalize the encounter. Maybe someone had hacked the server. Maybe I'd misfiled the recording. I even asked the overnight engineer if he'd touched anything, but he swore he hadn't. That evening, I returned to my apartment, which felt unusually cold. I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting to see someone in a black suit watching me. Nothing was there, of course. I plugged in my backup drive and started scrolling through files, music clips, phone interviews, outtakes, but no trace of the recording, no audio, no empty file, nothing. Over the next few days, I struggled to return to normal, Every laptop opening, every door knock, every tire hiss brought that same unease. I gave vague answers to friends about late-night shows, mumbling about technical issues. Subtle oddities began to accumulate. Neighbors mentioned a black sedan parked across the street, but it would vanish when I looked. Lights flickered in my empty kitchen. My phone rang with no caller ID, answering only to static. Those men weren't just corporate auditors or local officials. Their interest in a single audio file was far beyond normal. And deep down I knew something was very wrong. The Perseid meteor shower was set to peak that night, and I knew this spot near the state park had perfect conditions for astrophotography. It was mid-August around midnight when I drove out to the edge of the park with my camera. I'd been doing this as a hobby for a couple of years. Nothing professional, just taking long exposure shots for fun. After parking at the end of the dirt access road, I carried my tripod about 50 yards into an open clearing and set up. Months later, my life at the radio station continued as usual. I scheduled interviews, prepared music segments, and handled the typical listener complaints and requests. The two men in black haunted my memories. Their calm, deliberate presence lingered in my mind. I started locking my office door, even during the day, and compulsively checked backups, hoping to find some trace of the missing file or the caller's voice. Nothing ever appeared. A week later, my personal phone rang. No number, just silence. I didn't answer. That night, a car briefly idled outside my apartment. When I looked through the blinds, it was empty. I couldn't tell if anyone had been there at all. I cautiously shared the story with a few colleagues, careful not to sound crazy. Most brushed it off as a prank or coincidence. Nobody seemed concerned about the missing recording, but I couldn't shake the feeling that these events were connected. The station eventually moved some equipment around. I changed my routine and stopped expecting anything unusual. Occasionally, the phone would still ring with silence, and a black sedan would slowly pass by outside. But I never saw those two men again. Their measured gaze stayed with me, calm and patient, as if they were sizing me up, not just asking for a file. I still wonder about the caller. Were the details real, or was it an elaborate setup? The audio was never recovered. Whatever happened to it, it's gone. I've learned to stop searching for answers when none exist, at least for now. Some nights I lie awake thinking about that call, the lights over the quarry, and the shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't. I've come to realize that some things exist in our world without explanation, and perhaps that's exactly how they're meant to be. The night was still, with crickets humming, and the sky completely clear. My intervalometer was set up, capturing 30-second exposures one after another. The first few shots revealed some nice meteor streaks. Nothing out of the ordinary. About an hour into the shoot, while reviewing the images, something caught my eye. A small, round light near the top of one frame looked like typical lens flare at first. But when I checked the next shot, taken just 30 seconds later, the light had moved, not streaked or blurred like a meteor, but shifted slightly, as if a star had moved over ours, except this happened in mere moments. Intrigued, I continued scrolling through the sequence. The light's movement was erratic. It would jump position, then pause for 2 or 3 exposures before moving again. Its brightness fluctuated, almost pulsing from dim to bright. What struck me most was its direction. While meteor trails flowed one way across the sky, this light moved completely opposite. I hadn't noticed anything unusual while shooting, only in the captured images. My initial explanation was a tumbling satellite, though its movement seemed unlike anything I'd seen before. I let the camera continue for another hour, but the light disappeared from subsequent frames. Back home, I imported the photos into Lightroom. Cropping and zooming revealed more details. The object wasn't perfectly round, but more like a flattened sphere with a metallic appearance and a faint halo. Its pulsing pattern was distinct, different from any camera artifact I'd encountered. 2 days passed without sharing the images. I planned to edit the full sequence first. On the third morning, a black sedan with heavily tinted windows appeared across the street. I assumed it was a visitor for a neighbor. An hour later, checking my mail, I saw the driver's door open. A man in a black suit, white shirt, and black tie approached. Notably, he wore no sunglasses, and his eyes remained fixed on me throughout his approach. Stopping just feet away, he spoke in a completely emotionless tone. "Are you willing to delete the last hour of exposures from August 12th? It started on a Thursday night in early spring. My parents were out late, Mom at her book club, Dad working the evening shift at the mill. I had the house to myself, half listening to music while tinkering with the ham radio I bought second-hand from Larry at the county flea market. Usually I'd pick up local chatter, truckers, hobbyists, weather reports. But that night was different. I landed on a frequency with a voice speaking something unfamiliar. Not English, not Spanish. Short, clipped words that sounded almost rhythmic, like someone reading from a code book. No music, no static, just this steady stream of syllables. I grabbed my notebook and scribbled down how the words sounded to me. When the voice stopped, a long pause followed. Just as I was about to switch frequencies, a different voice came through. Slower, deeper. It read out a string of numbers: 43.819122.475. Coordinates, maybe, though I didn't check right away. Days later, something strange happened. A man showed up, seemingly out of nowhere. He demanded I delete something, though I hadn't told anyone about the weird light I'd seen. His behavior was unsettling. He repeated his demand word for word, his voice flat and unchanging. When I pressed him for answers, he stood silent for 10 seconds, just staring. Then he turned, walked back to his sedan, which had no front license plate, and drove away slowly. That night, I checked my doorbell camera footage. The video had frozen for exactly 30 seconds while he stood in front of me. The audio continued, but the image remained fixed on one frame, me holding Mail, his shoulder barely visible. When the video resumed, he was already halfway to his car. A couple days later, I went to edit the photos from the sequence with the pulsing object. The last 15 shots were now corrupted. Black squares with file cannot be opened errors. They had been fine the last time I checked. I still have the earlier frames where the object first appeared, but I never saw that car again. After school the next day, I put the mysterious numbers into Google Maps. They led to a patch of woods about 20 m south of town, near a place called Devil's Hollow. I'd driven past this spot with my dad before. Nothing special, just farmland and tree lines. I didn't tell anyone about the strange transmission. It wasn't like I thought I'd discovered something huge. It was just weird. I tucked the notebook in my desk drawer and figured that was that. The next afternoon, right after I got home from school, the knock came. 2 men stood on the porch, both wearing identical black suits with white shirts and black ties. No logos, no badges. One was tall and thin with pale skin and a sharp jawline. The other was shorter, heavier, with dark hair combed straight back. They didn't smile. The tall one said my name like he was confirming it. "You have a he asked. I froze for a second. "Yeah," I said. "We'd like to see your radio logs," he stated flatly, as if it were a given. I didn't move right away and asked who they were with. The shorter one reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, I thought he was going to show an ID, but instead, he pulled out a small black notebook and flipped it open. I couldn't see what was inside from the doorway. "You picked up a transmission yesterday," he said. "We need to verify your records." I told him I didn't think I had to give them anything without my parents home. The tall one looked at his companion, then back at me. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "We just need to make sure it's logged correctly. It's for your safety." I remember those exact words. For your safety. They didn't sound right. I suggested taking their information and having my dad call them. They exchanged another glance. The shorter one closed his notebook. "We'll be back," he said. They turned and walked down the driveway toward a black sedan parked at the curb. I watched from the window as they got in. The car didn't have plates. That night I checked my notebook. The page with the strange words and numbers was gone. Not torn out, gone like it had never existed. All other pages remained intact, my handwriting exactly where I'd left it, just that one entry missing. I had turned the radio off for a few days. The next week, while doing homework on my bed, the radio suddenly clicked on by itself. I hadn't touched it. Static filled the air, and then that same deep voice returned, speaking numbers. 43.819122.475. That night, I dreamed of walking through a forest of bare trees. Winter-like branches surrounded me, but the ground felt soft, almost like wet sand. Voices echoed ahead, yet no one was visible. When I woke up, the radio was on again, hissing static, despite being switched off. I unplugged it and shoved it into the closet. 2 nights later, returning home after dark from a friend's place, I noticed a familiar black sedan parked 2 houses down my street. As I passed, I glanced through the driver's side window. The tall man from before sat motionless, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. After parking in my driveway and pretending to check my phone, I looked up. The car had vanished. Erin, my wife, and I had escaped to the desert for a long weekend, a couple hours outside of Moab. We've been seeking more isolated trips, just us, a tent and no cell service. After driving 30 minutes down a winding dirt road, we found a flat, open area about a quarter mile from a low ridge. The weather was perfect, Warm days, nights dropping to the low 50s, with skies full of stars. On our second night, we sat by the fire after dinner. The moonless sky was pitch black, stars so bright they seemed touchable. We sat quietly, listening to the soft wind and occasional brush rustling. Suddenly, I noticed something over the ridge, a sphere of light unlike anything I'd seen before. Larger than a car, it glowed a soft orange-white. Hovering about 30 feet above ground, it moved with an unusual, deliberate motion, not bouncing like a drone or flying straight like a plane, but weaving slowly as if searching. We watched for a full minute before Aaron asked if I was seeing it too. We were sitting there, completely stunned. The object made no sound, no humming, no engine noise, nothing. Suddenly, it shifted position, zipping 20 or 30 feet sideways, so quickly my brain couldn't even process the movement. It hovered again, then shot straight up until it was barely visible against the starry sky. After it vanished, we sat in silence for a while. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, we decided to call it a night, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept waking up, thinking I saw faint glows outside the tent. The next morning, we packed up and started driving back toward the highway. The dirt road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. When I spotted a black sedan parked across the road ahead, I slowed to a crawl. The car was immaculate, shiny as if it had just been washed, which seemed odd given how dusty the road was. 2 men stood beside it, both wearing identical black suits, white shirts, and black ties. Their posture was rigid, hands clasped in front, faces exposed to the harsh sunlight. As we pulled up, I rolled the window down halfway. One of the men approached my side. His skin was pale, not sickly, but almost colorless. In a flat, emotionless voice, he said, "We'll need your cameras." I told him we hadn't taken any pictures. Technically true, since we'd brought my old camera but never used it. He didn't react, simply repeating, "We'll need your cameras." Aaron chimed in, confirming we hadn't taken any photos. The man stared at me for a moment, then stepped back. His companion hadn't moved or spoken at all. "You can go," he said. Both men walked back to the sedan in perfect sync, got inside without another word, and pulled just far enough aside to let us pass. As we drove by, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The sedan was there. Seconds later, when I looked again, the road behind us was empty. Just open desert stretching back to the ridge. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive to the highway. I still can't shake the memory of those men and how they demanded our cameras, as if they already knew exactly what we'd witnessed. Last October, I was hiking the coastal trails in Bar Harbor. The morning was perfect, cool and sunny, with that crisp pre-winter air. My camera had been out all morning, capturing the rugged coastline and the iconic Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse. I'm no professional photographer, just someone who enjoys playing with a camera when the light is just right. The tide was low, so I scrambled down onto the rocks below the lighthouse, searching for unique photo angles. Only a few people were around, some bird watchers up the trail and distant fishermen on a boat. For about an hour, I wandered between tide pools, snapping waves and scenery. At one point, something caught my eye in the viewfinder. A shiny object flickered high above the tree line, visible for just a second before vanishing. I dismissed it as sunlight glinting off a plane or a seagull, nothing unusual. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the gravel parking lot, planning to head into town for dinner and review my day's photographs. But as I emerged from the trail, 2 men in black suits and vintage hats stood near my car. They looked like they'd stepped out of the 1950s. Initially, I thought they might be part of a historical reenactment or film production. But when they turned toward me in perfect synchronization, something felt off. "Where did you have your negatives developed?" one asked with unsettling calm. Confused, I explained I was using a digital camera and hadn't developed anything. They repeated the question, word for word, their stillness unnerving. No shifting, no blinking. I showed them my camera, hoping to clarify. One stepped closer, not quickly, but with an intentional movement that made maintaining eye contact difficult. He asked if I'd reviewed the exposures. "No, not yet," I replied. They nodded simultaneously, then stepped back. They both walked down the gravel drive toward the main road after telling me to take care driving home. In those brief moments, I turned to put my stuff in the car, and when I looked back just 5 seconds later, they had vanished. No vehicle, no sound, nothing. Later, loading the pictures onto my laptop, I discovered something unusual. Between the lighthouse tower and tree line, a metallic object glowed unnaturally. It was perfectly round, like a ball bearing, too sharp to be a bird. And unlike any drone I'd seen, the light hit it in a way that made it almost luminescent. The next morning, attempting to show a friend, I found the file wouldn't open. All other photos from that day remained intact, but this single shot was mysteriously corrupted. My night shift at the weather service was typical, lonely and quiet. Tracking a line of summer thunderstorms moving slowly from the west, I monitored radar and satellite imagery. Everything seemed normal until an unusual return caught my attention. Small, perhaps the size of a compact car, this object moved differently. It zipped through the storm's leading edge, slowing down and cutting sharply north, as if making a deliberate choice. Initially, I thought it might be a military drone, but its movement defied explanation. At one point, it reached over 200 knots, then nearly stopped for 3 seconds before darting off again. Most bizarrely, it carried no transponder signal, something unprecedented in my experience tracking aircraft. I screen captured the sequence, partly from professional habit and partly out of curiosity. Zooming in on a frame where it passed beneath the densest cloud line, I noticed a faint halo surrounding it. The light seemed internal but didn't scatter like lightning. I saved the data in our shared archive under an unremarkable file nail and left a note for the next shift. 2 men in black suits were waiting in the lobby before I'd even had my morning coffee. They looked like they'd stepped out of an old black and white photo. Crisp white shirts, dark ties, no identifying badges. The tall, thin one did all the talking. He asked if I was monitoring Sector 3B the previous night. Half asleep, I confirmed I was. His smile was polite but didn't reach his eyes. The data you collected has been reclassified. We'll need access to your workstation, he said. Following protocol, I asked who they were. He repeated only that the data had been reclassified. His companion, a shorter man, kept scanning the room, never making direct eye contact. Still stunned, I logged in and stepped back. The tall man navigated directly to my saved folder without searching, deleted the files, and emptied the recycle bin. He then moved to the backup drive and repeated the process. After they left without explanation, I realized they hadn't asked for my password. They already knew it. I checked with my supervisor, who knew nothing about the visitors. No one had been signed in or scheduled to review the radar logs. When I tried pulling the files from the server, I discovered something impossible. All 3 redundant backup copies were completely gone. Not corrupted, not hidden, simply erased as if they never existed. The radar station log showed my anomaly note had vanished, with everything else unchanged. That night, driving home in unexpectedly heavy rain, I spotted a black sedan down the street. No front plates, windows too dark to see inside. I watched it from my truck, but it never moved. By morning, it had disappeared. A week later, I was called for another overnight shift, trying to convince myself it was all in my imagination. I go there when I want open sky, and no neighbors yelling about prop noise. The old airfield is half park, half forgotten runway, with tall grass and a chain-link fence sagging in places. A couple of maintenance hangars smell like oil and dust. That evening, the thermals were good and the light was sharp. I launched the drone from the grassy burn just as the sun was dropping, trying to catch the last of the sun on the control tower for a time-lapse. Something felt strange from the start. The birds were missing, no swallows skimming over the grass at dusk. The air was quiet in a hollow way. No insects either, like someone had turned down the volume on the place. I shrugged it off and sent the drone up, watching the live feed on my tablet. A little after golden hour, something crossed the horizon on the north side of the field. At first it looked like a lens flare, bright and round, but it moved. It cut across the frame, low over the hangars, then slid into the bank of clouds that had started to gather. The drone clocked its impossible movement. A blink of speed, and then a full stop right at the cloud base. No sound through the tablet, no echo from the field. Then, as if someone had pressed fast forward on reality, it was gone inside the cloud, too quick for the eye to follow. I hit record out of reflex. I always record everything. On playback, the object was a hard-edged disc, not a smear. It hit the cloud bank and the pixels bloomed around it for a frame like heat haze, then nothing. The timestamp showed a clean 1-second gap where the object should have been, the cloud moving the same way before and after. I replayed the segment until my neck cramped. Halfway through the night, I caught another blip on the radar. Same size, same movement, same strange pauses. Before I could save it, the signal blinked out, not faded, just disappeared mid-scan. 10 minutes later, the phone on the desk rang. When I answered, no one spoke. A faint hum of electrical equipment filled the line, and then a flat voice said, "You won't find it again." The line went dead. I haven't told anyone else about it since. I'd been checking my emails and going about my day, but something felt off. Earlier, I'd loaded the SD card on my laptop in the car and noticed something strange in the footage. Just to be safe, I uploaded a copy to my external drive and tucked the original card in my pocket. Late afternoon, a sedan with dark windows sat at the end of my street longer than seemed normal. No plates, just sitting there before rolling away. Normally, I'd ignore something like that, but this time it stuck in my mind. That evening, an unknown number called and went silent when I answered. 2 days later, just after lunch, 2 men knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw them, black suits, polished shoes, looking like they were about to be questioned in a corporate lobby. They didn't seem threatening, just precise. Curiosity got the better of me, and I let them in. They introduced themselves softly, almost as if offering me a choice. One held out a blank card. I waved it away. The taller one smiled slightly and asked directly about the SD card from my flight the previous evening. His tone made my mouth go dry. When I confirmed I had the card, they explained they needed it for investigation purposes. But something felt off. People usually ask for copies or files. Their insistence on the physical card, delivered with that particular tone, felt like pressure. I initially refused, offering to make copies instead. The taller man nodded, seemingly unsurprised, and repeated they needed the actual card, mentioning chain of custody in a way that sounded like dialogue from a crime show. I set the scene through conversations with a friend in airport operations. Something about how they spoke felt off. If this was a prank, it was meticulously planned. We stood in my cramped hallway, exchanging small rationalizations. 2 men arrived. They didn't sit. One, with a slightly wrinkled sleeve, kept his hands folded as if touching anything might disrupt the delicate situation. Digital copies can be altered, he stated firmly. We need the original. His gaze locked with mine, leaving no room for argument. His companion stared at the ceiling fan's rotation. I handed over the card. It felt inexplicably heavy. He accepted it with both hands, treating it like a fragile artifact. He examined the corner label, then slipped it into a small, padded envelope. Their movements carried a calm, corporate efficiency. No threats, no unnecessary conversation, just pure focus. Before departing, the tall one delivered a cryptic warning. Appreciate your cooperation. Don't post anything until we contact you again. When I pressed about their affiliation, FAA, police, university, they remained frustratingly vague. Investigation, he said simply. We'll be in touch. Their exit was as mysterious as their arrival. No car waited outside, no footsteps disturbed the yard. After the door closed, I thought I heard a vehicle's distant hum, though the refrigerator and starting kettle could have created the sound. I tried resuming normal life. I called Mara, a local paper editor, who offered to check the footage for anomalies. She seemed unsurprised when I mentioned surrendering the card. People like this don't say investigation and leave polite envelopes, she remarked. They have official forms. The next evening, local news briefly mentioned pilots reporting a drone near the airfield. The report revealed nothing about discs or missing frames, only quoting an Airfield ops source claiming the issue was resolved. Watching the station footage twice, I noticed the exact fence section where I'd been stood, now appearing empty and unremarkable. A week passed. No calls, no emails, no official correspondence arrived. I repeatedly checked the envelope, its flap seemingly untouched, holding on to this sole tangible reminder of that strange encounter. I walked through the fence at the old municipal airfield. Just after sunrise, the only quiet place left in town, weeds had overtaken the taxiways, and the tower stood half-collapsed while river gusts rolled across the tarmac in long, lazy waves. For years, I'd been coming here with a camera, capturing how light plays on rust and concrete. That morning, the sky was a low, clean gray, and the air tasted like river. The drone hummed in its bag on the shelf. Battery cool, I plugged the external drive into the laptop and scrolled through footage folders, searching for the copy I'd made right after the flight. The backup file was there, but when I opened it, something was off. The timeline leapt a few seconds, with a black frame where the object had entered the cloud. 1 frame later, the cloud had shifted slightly. The encoding showed no errors, just a clean jump like a deliberate cut. I considered going to the station, posting the clip online, reflecting on how small and explainable my life usually felt. Instead, I shut the laptop and checked the window. The car was gone. A car I'd noticed earlier, different make. Same quiet waiting had been parked in my street. 2 weeks later, a man in a plain suit left a small anonymous envelope on my porch. Inside was a single printout. A still from my footage, cropped so tight the disc filled the page like a coin. Someone had printed it on nice paper, not my printer. The back simply read, "Please exercise discretion." I taped the print inside my storage cabinet among propellers and spare batteries. The card from before had been sealed with tape, opened, then taped again, and then vanished. Now, I was left with questions. What were they? Did handing over the card calm something or start something new? The birds haven't quite returned to the airfield the same way. When I stand on the berm at dusk, looking at the clouds feels stranger. I still fly sometimes, but now I always set the recorder to save to 2 cards in one drive, and I keep a copy physically separated, just in case. The old airfield was a canvas of weathered metal and faded memories. I crawled under an orange taped gate with a no trespassing sign that seemed frozen in time. The runway, once a smooth ribbon, now cracked with grass pushing through its seams, stretched out before me. No signs of life, no workers, no vehicles, just me and the potential company of a raccoon. Halfway down the 3rd taxiway, something caught my eye. An aircraft unlike any I'd seen before, sitting just beyond the hangars. Its presence felt deliberate, like it had been carefully placed with parking lights still glowing softly. From a distance, it was unremarkable, a matte, dark surface with no visible registration numbers or markings. The aircraft's shape was familiar yet strange. It had the basic outline of a light twin, but its details were off. Wings narrower and swept in a configuration I couldn't match to any known model. What struck me most was the absolute silence. No engine sounds, no mechanical whisperings, nothing. If a plane had recently landed, you'd expect some activity, avionic fans spinning, tow vehicles moving, but the lot remained completely still. As a photographer who explores abandoned spaces, my first instinct was to capture this moment. I stepped off the taxiway, moving closer through the grass, carefully framing the shot. Suddenly, a flock of starlings erupted from beneath my feet, their sudden flight startling in the quiet. Then, abruptly, all bird sounds ceased, not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had hit a mute button on the entire landscape. The silence around the aircraft was unnatural. Where mechanical sound should have been a motor's whisper, a cooling fan's hum, there was nothing. My camera's autofocus seemed deafening in comparison. The stillness felt deliberate, as if the air itself was following some unspoken rule. About 60 yards out, another detail caught my attention. The concrete beneath the tires looked slightly darker, like something had been spilled and hastily wiped away. A faint ring of dust lingered, the kind you might see where something heavy had recently rested. The aircraft had been sitting idle, giving me the sense it wasn't just a recent arrival. I scrolled through the preview thumbnails on my camera, noticing the body's unnaturally smooth surface. Almost too perfect. The battery icon blinked down, signaling a pending drain. As I circled around to capture a profile shot, a sudden awareness washed over me. I wasn't alone. 2 men materialized from behind Hangar C, their appearance identical. Black suits, narrow ties, short cropped hair, and shoes polished to an unnatural sheen. They stood about 10 paces away, having approached with such silence that they seemed to materialize out of thin air. One tilted his head, scanning the sky. The other studied the aircraft with calculated precision. Their movements were deliberate, practiced, the hallmark of individuals accustomed to being observed. "You're not supposed to be here," the taller one stated, his tone a polite euphemism for trespassing. I quickly assessed the situation. Were they a landowner, law enforcement, or private security? No badges or identification were visible, just immaculately pressed suits and a measured speech pattern that was neither threatening nor welcoming. "I know," I responded, "just taking some photos. I come here often." The shorter man's quick glance swept my camera strap. "It landed," he said, a statement, not a question. "Yeah, maybe," I replied, unsure. He cut me off. "This area is under quarantine." The declaration seemed absurd. No hazardous material signs, no containment vehicles. Nothing suggested danger or contamination. The taller man folded his hands, offering a smile that suggested reasonable compliance with an unreasonable request. "For everyone's safety, you'll leave the site. We'll need your cooperation." Curiously, they made no mention of my photographs. No demand to delete files or review my camera's contents. Their approach felt calculated, letting implied force do the work without explicit threats. I reached into my pocket for my phone, processing the surreal encounter. The field had been quiet when I first approached, but something felt off. My camera was out, capturing frames of the old aircraft, Suddenly, two men appeared, the shorter one repeating out firmly. I didn't want trouble, so I started back the way I'd come, boots crunching on broken glass. Carefully watching the aircraft, I made sure not to run or reach for another shot. Their eyes tracked my every step until I crossed the wire fence and passed under the sagging gate. By the time I reached the small bridge over the drainage ditch, they had vanished. No car, no footprints, just silence. When I tried calling the station, the dial tone felt like a held breath. Driving home slowly, I kept checking my mirrors, catching glimpses of the field. From the road, the plane looked smaller, almost withdrawn into the airfield. That afternoon, I dove into investigating what I'd witnessed. Uploading the memory card to my laptop, I copied the raw files and started zooming in. Typical details emerged. Rivets, faded paint, small smudges. One frame where I'd walked around the nose showed a strange reflective glint in a section where pixels looked oddly compressed. No unusual sounds, just the mic's standard wind noise. I called the county land management office to check if any restrictions existed on the old field. The woman hesitated, then reported nothing listed. No notices, no quarantine. It's been default county property for years. Government maps often have weird blank spaces, so I wasn't fully satisfied. Over the next 3 days, I couldn't shake my thoughts about those mysterious men. Why didn't they ask for my photos or equipment? They simply ordered me to leave. Seeking answers, I enlisted a crop duster friend. We returned to the runway at dusk, driven by mutual curiosity and speculation about potential new registries or testing. We walked closer to the concrete spot where the plane had sat, the surface scrubbed clean and darker in an irregular oval. My friend knocked it with his knuckles like a car door, finding nothing inside, no trace left behind. No wheel marks on the dirt, no dragged tire tracks through the grass, just a place that had recently held weight and now didn't. Logic had overridden my better judgment. We'd parked in the scrub a half-mile out and watched as the plane disappeared. When we got back to the truck, my friend asked if I'd filed a report. I told him no, unsure who'd even take such a report. He inquired if the suits had requested the footage. I said they hadn't. He gave me that look friends give when they suspect the explanation is painfully simple. You should make copies, he said. Keep them somewhere else. Keep them in the cloud. I agreed, but an uneasy thought crept in. If my phone had lost signal the day I left the card in my pocket, whatever caused that could return. That night, a white rectangle appeared, tucked under my windshield wiper, neatly printed text reading, "Area under quarantine, do not return." No agency, no contact number. I photographed it and threw the paper away, but when I tried to view the shot, the file was corrupted. I haven't gone back since. I kept a backup of the other photos on an old drive hidden in a filing cabinet. Partly because I couldn't discard them, partly because someone had warned me about online records vanishing. This morning, I checked the drive, the folders were there, but the plane sequence was one frame shorter, as if the morning itself had briefly inhaled and exhaled. Dreams still haunt me, the way the sky went mute when the birds lifted, the calm of those men in suits saying, "Quarantine," like it was routine. If asked what I'd do differently, I'm uncertain. I'd like to believe I'd push closer or contact authorities, but their politeness and the heavy silence made trespass feel insignificant. For now, I tell myself I'm lucky I left without incident. I also tell myself not to return, which amounts to the same thing. It was late July, a dry, scorching day, when I was coming down the ridge, and noticed the cornfield wasn't a cornfield anymore. A long day of driving had brought me across Indiana and westward, with nothing but endless fields rolling past my windshield. The dusk was heavy, the air trembling above the highway. I'd been watching the landscape for hours, trying to keep my mind alert. Rows of corn, distant tractors, the brief dust cloud from passing cars. Then something caught my eye. Maybe a half-mile off the shoulder, suspended just above the cornstalks, was a triangular shape, flat-bottomed like an upturned wedge, with small dim lights at its points. It hung around 40 or 50 feet up, low enough that the corn tops bent slightly under its shadow. No sound accompanied it, just the familiar background of insects and road noise. Its movement was unlike any mechanical vehicle I'd seen. It rolled slowly as if scanning the field with deliberate, even motion. Then it would tilt, drift a few yards and stop. I pulled into an old farm turnout and cut the engine, wanting to hear everything clearly. The truck settled and the radio faded. The air felt compressed, heavy. A flock of starlings that had been scattered across the field moments before had vanished. I scanned the tree line and sky, expecting some rational explanation. A crop duster, perhaps. Nothing. Just that triangular silhouette against bruised clouds. Almost instinctively, I grabbed my phone and started recording. The battery was full, and the camera initially captured the shape exactly as I saw it. Then something strange happened. The screen fuzzed, not like poor cell reception, but as if the image and reality were momentarily disconnected. One heartbeat of blackness. When the view returned, the triangle had shifted slightly to the left. I could see it clearly with my own eyes, but the video showed something different. The recording seemed normal, yet that moment of movement didn't look like a typical glitch. I remained there until the light faded and the object drifted up into the low clouds, a small dark shape swallowed by grey. Feeling somewhat ridiculous, I still radioed my dispatcher. Something odd at mile marker 52 over the Briggs farm, I reported. I rolled down the highway, empty lanes rattling past, the cab cool and quiet. My mind kept drifting back to what I'd seen earlier, something just on the edge of memory. I checked the side mirror repeatedly, catching glimpses of a crooked outline on the horizon, though it could have been nothing more than my imagination playing tricks. My next stop was a small interstate truck plaza with a blue-roofed diner known for good pie. I planned to grab coffee, stretch my legs, and maybe settle whatever strange tension the sky had stirred in me. As I pulled into my usual parking row, something immediately felt off. Two men in black stood near the propane tanks at the end of the convenience store. They were positioned like perfect bookends, dark suits, narrow ties, shiny shoes, the kind of outfit you'd see in a movie when a mysterious figure emerges from a cab. Their eyes were fixed on the lot, the traffic, and most pointedly, on me. I exited the truck slowly and walked to the restroom as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. When I returned, they were still there, unchanged. A woman in a reflective vest filled her water jug, and the men didn't even glance her way. The cashier kept looking nervously between the door and the register. Their gaze was intense, not moving their heads, but watching me with laser-focused precision. They didn't enter the store, didn't buy anything, just stood at the lot's edge, a silent, unnerving presence that made me want to flee. The urge to back up, pull out, and escape was overwhelming. Staying felt like giving them an opportunity I didn't want to provide. I first noticed them standing still, not moving, at the rest stop. Two men, identical in every way, same jawline, eyes, expressionless mouths. They focused intently, like the parking lot was some kind of stage. No cashier came out. No security approached. Other drivers continued their routines, completely unaware. I tried the polite driver's smile. That small human gesture meant to ease tension. Nothing. They didn't smile back. They didn't blink much, these men in black standing quietly. The kind of scene you'd joke about during late-night conspiracy talks over coffee. The dispatcher's voice echoed in my mind. Keep rolling. I had no real sense of how to process what was happening. Later that night, my friend Luis called me brave when I showed him the video on my phone. I wouldn't have shared it if I'd first scanned the footage. There was an odd jump right where an object crossed the frame, almost like someone had spliced in a different cloud segment. The audio track held a brief moment of high, thin static that looked like a recorded squeal, then silence. Luis leaned back and told me to keep my ears open. The sensible advice about staying alert while driving. Somewhere during those strange minutes, I bought a pie. Habit dictated that a driver shouldn't hit the road hungry, so I set it on the passenger seat. When I returned, the two men were still standing in the same spot, unmoving like they were part of the landscape. The sun had dropped lower. I started the truck and pulled out. They watched me leave. No waves, no approach, just silent observation. I rationalized it as a coincidence. Maybe they were officials working on something, parked there for legitimate reasons. But an hour later, when I passed another rest area, a clean sedan sat under a distant light. No one was near it. The driver's door was closed. The license plate looked pristine from my passing angle. Something didn't feel right. I was on the roof because it's the only place in my block with enough darkness to see beyond the sodium street lamps. Between rusting HVAC units and a dying potted palm, I'd set up my telescope, tripod feet on gravel, red headlamp tucked into my jacket to preserve my night vision. My name's Marco Reyes. I'm not an astronomer, just someone who likes pointing expensive glass at empty bits of sky, trying to make sense of small things moving up there. The night was cold and sharp, late October, with a thin crescent moon. I was logging the Cassiopeia sweep when my planet tracking app pinged the satellite pass. I always check satellites. They move like they're on rails. This didn't. At first, I saw 4 points of light, evenly spaced, crawling across the sky, as if someone had snapped a line of LEDs into place. They held formation perfectly. No drift, no jitter, just that quiet mechanical glide. Then they did something that made me sit back from the eyepiece, because it made no sense in any of the little rhythms I knew. The formation split. Later that day, I could have sworn I saw someone in a dark suit sitting perfectly still on the passenger side, staring forward. I haven't said anything to my company about the craft or the men. I filed a short note in my log, saw unknown object over Briggs Farm. Photo saved. At home that night, my daughter asked why I smelled like diesel and pie. She wanted to know about the sky looking orange on the way in. I said the usual. The highway, heat, a long day. We ate and watched cartoons, and I put the phone away. I don't know who the men were, or why they didn't buy anything, or why one of them had a tie that didn't move in the breeze. I don't know whether whatever was over the Briggs farm was watching something or looking for something, or whether I'd been the only human who happened to notice. All I know is that when the lot was full of drivers, coffee to go, diesel fumes, the little clutter and noise of people running short errands, 2 men in black stood at the edge and did nothing but watch. I kept rolling. The pay is good for the miles, and the miles are my business. If it is anything else, it hasn't told me yet. The lights moved with an eerie precision that defied explanation. Sharp turns that would shred any aircraft, pauses that weren't really pauses but sudden jumps. For 3 minutes, they pushed in and snapped apart, sliding sideways without the slightest curve, vanishing and reappearing a fraction of a degree away. No sound broke the stillness. The air around me on the roof remained completely normal. Traffic hummed down the avenue. A dog barked once. A distant plane droned. But the motion of these lights carried a physics all its own. Not a scattered diffusion like birds taking flight, but a clean geometric transformation. 4 points arranged into a perfect square. Then 2 points sliding inward to form a diamond. Suddenly, 1 point folded at such a sharp angle it seemed the light itself had transformed from a dot to an edge. The change was instantaneous, like a page flipping. I blinked, and the configuration shifted again, corners forming and reforming. I checked the scope for a reflection, tapped the eyepiece, wondering if an internal glitch was playing tricks. The live feed on my phone showed the same phenomenon, just smaller. This wasn't a hallucination. I started recording, doing what anyone would do when confronted with something that refuses to behave normally. After 10 minutes, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Stupid, small, yet intensely alert. Then the sky returned to its typical scattered state. An airplane crossed with blinking navigation lights. A satellite moved exactly as a satellite should. I packed away my scope, my hand still slightly unsteady. When I tried to view the recording, my phone choked. File corrupted, the app announced. The polite digital way of saying some moments can't be captured. I shrugged and went inside. It was late, and rooftops always seem to harbor the best ghosts. The next morning, I reported to my job at the downtown public library, where I've worked as the evening reference librarian for 3 years. My work is straightforward, lending answers and keeping teenagers quiet, which is why what happened next felt doubly strange. At 8:15, walking out of the staff entrance, I noticed 2 men on the sidewalk across the street. They stood out because the morning felt so unremarkably ordinary. 2 dark silhouettes in suits, unlike any you'd see on a typical Tuesday morning, black wool, impossibly crisp. 2 men stood motionless under a storefront awning, their narrow ties and pristine shoes catching my eye. They faced the library entrance without moving, without talking, without even pretending to check their phones. Their stillness was unnerving, like movie extras waiting for a director's cue. I tried to rationalize their presence. Maybe they were waiting for a friend. Maybe they were private security. People wait on sidewalks all the time, right? But something about their synchronized posture made my stomach sink. I changed my route to the staff entrance, hoping to avoid them. As I passed the bakery window, I caught them in my peripheral vision. Still there. Still watching. My focus wavered. A patron asked about genealogy microfilm, and I pointed absently, my mind drifting back to the 2 men. Later, I pulled up the roof video on my backup drive. The single frame was pure white, as if someone had deliberately erased that moment. I scrubbed back and forth, but the white frame remained, lasting the length of a heartbeat. I-11, I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. He seemed skeptical, but let me go. When I exited through the staff entrance, the men had moved closer. Now standing by the newsstand, their gaze fixed on the library door. They didn't follow. They didn't approach. They simply watched in an unsettling, silent vigil. Driving home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting them to be trailing me like characters in a bad movie. The street was ordinary. A delivery van, distant sounds of trains, a kid on a bicycle, someone mowing a lawn. I knew I should have called someone, the police, a friend, my manager. But how do you explain? 2 men are staring at my workplace. It would sound ridiculous. Instead, I sat on my couch, the afternoon stretching before me, my chest tight with an undefined anxiety. Over the next couple days, strange little occurrences started adding up. It began with a video recording that behaved oddly, playing normally until it hit a white frame, then jumping forward a second as if someone had deliberately edited reality's continuity. My apartment clock lost 7 minutes before catching back up. My neighbor mentioned her baby monitor caught a burst of static at 2 a.m., just a thin, ghostly sweep like old radio tubes exhaling. My phone battery drained unusually fast. The weather app on my tablet kept shifting forecasts, showing rain one moment and something different the next. Each event seemed small, plausible, wearing the perfect disguise of coincidence. When I returned to work on Wednesday, everything felt slightly off. At the newsstand, those men in suits were back, watching the door, cataloguing every movement. A mother with a stroller paused, looked at them, and hurried away with a changed demeanor. A bus driver and shopkeeper exchanged a knowing glance before shrugging it off. The men continued their vigilant observation. When I left early at lunchtime, they tracked me with blank, featureless faces. No sunglasses, nothing to connect them to the urban landscape. I walked with my head down, an unsettling sensation crawling over me. They seemed to know exactly which pocket held my telescope key, as if the white frame from my video was etched into their memory like a precise schedule. I considered alternative plans. Parking across town, sleeping at a friend's, changing clothes, and disappearing for a night. But ultimately, I went home. Habit is a powerful anchor. That evening, I attempted normalcy, cooking pasta, washing dishes, pretending the sky remained unchanged. The topaz street light filtered through the blinds, looking exactly as it always had. I tucked a red headlamp in the drawer by the door just in case, and when I closed my eyes, the white frame burned bright and jagged behind my vision. A strange and unsettling sequence of events began on Route 47 just past midnight. The road was wet from earlier rain, highway lamps casting long, smeary ribbons of light across the slick surface. My wife, Maya, dozed beside me, and our 8-year-old Eli munched crackers in the back. The baby monitor hummed softly with our daughter's sleeping sounds. That's when I first noticed the light, a soft white dot hovering just above telephone pole height off to the right. Initially, I thought it might be a drone local hobbyists sometimes fly over the fields, but something was different. It didn't move like a plane or helicopter. No blinking red aircraft light, just a steady, unnerving glow. I slowed down, partly because of the road's curve, and watched it. The light tilted slightly, adjusting its angle. Then, impossibly, it fell into step with our car, 20 miles per hour, consistently to our right. When I accelerated to pass a tractor, the light matched our speed precisely. No wobbling, no fighting the wind. It tracked us as if invisibly tethered to the vehicle. "You see that?" I muttered, more to myself than anyone. Maya barely opened an eye before closing it again. Eli, typical of his curious age, asked, "Is that a star?" With the tone of a child seeking confirmation of something he already suspected. We pulled into Maple Grove gas station out of routine. Maya appreciates their bathrooms, and Eli wanted more crackers. As I killed the engine, something felt off. The city had been feeling watched lately. 2 suited men had been standing across the street from my workplace the past 2 days, doing nothing but observing until I left. I can't explain the missing frame. Was it a hole cut in time? A glitch in technology? A trick of nerves? All I know is that something felt different, like a camera you suddenly noticed, impossible to unsee. The wet asphalt smelled like poured concrete, and station lights made puddles sparkle. A black sedan eased into the space 2 pumps down, its engine ticking as if just arrived. 2 men stepped out, black suits, black ties, pale shirts, nothing printed, no lanyards. One walked with hands folded at his front, the other scanning the area with a level gaze. The air inside the cab felt louder. A dot of light hovered beyond the pumps, an unnatural punctuation against the grey sky. Our car sat with headlights on, pillows half sticking out of the back. I remember thinking there was no reason for suited men to be here at this hour unless they'd missed a flight. Eli and I went inside, with Maya following to check the refrigerated section as she always does. Tom, the attendant who knows half the county by voice, made a small joke about the rain and recent power outage. He glanced between the men, the pumps, and us, seemingly gauging whether our presence would complicate his night. By the time we returned to the car, one of the suited men had approached. His movement was deliberate, an economy of motion practiced countless times. His face was unremarkable, too neat, with a corporate neutrality that made him instantly forgettable. "You folks should take a different route home," he said. No threat, no concern, just a statement like a weather report. He looked at me, then Maya, as if observing a routine traffic decision. When I said, "Excuse me," he repeated, "different route." I was tired and wanted to get on the road. The rational things lined up, but something felt off. The gas station was quiet when the stranger approached. His mouth barely moved as he spoke, a practiced smile reminiscent of a salesman delivering the same pitch countless times. "We advise it," he said, glancing between the pumps and us. Another figure loomed behind him like a shadow. Maya was already buckling Eli into the booster, keys in hand. "Look," she said softly, careful not to seem rude to what could be a helpful stranger. "We're set on our way." She asked if he was with the county, but his response was cryptic. "We work with interests that prefer discretion," he explained. "It's better if you avoid the lowland," the word echoed in my mind. I knew that stretch of highway, well, the dip near the old mill where water collected after heavy rain. We'd driven it countless times returning from family visits. It was shorter, and I loved how the road wound through trees at night. Suddenly, those familiar puddles seemed ominous, potential hiding spots for washed-out culverts. The car behind us idled like a chess piece waiting to move. I mumbled, "Thanks for the heads up," feeling it was the polite thing to do. We had no idea who these men were, but anyone could offer advice about road conditions. He nodded subtly, returning to his sedan. Both men drove away without a signal, vanishing from the lot's edge as if erasing themselves from the scene. We followed his suggestion, taking a route that cut wide through the ridge instead of the lowland. The dot that had followed us earlier matched our speed precisely, then hung back momentarily before disappearing completely. Something about the interaction nagged at me. Interests that prefer discretion sounded like lawyer speak, or a phrase used by those wanting to remain unnamed. I considered calling the station's non-emergency line, but decided against it. The sense of something official felt larger than any potential explanation. We continued driving, the strange encounter playing in my mind. We drove home slowly that night, the asphalt slick from rain. No headlights followed us, no other cars on the ridge road. The night seemed to tighten around us, trees casting strange shapes against the dark sky. Eli slept soundly between his crackers and the heater's steady hum, while Maya's head nodded occasionally. Pulling into the driveway, I left the engine running, finding some comfort in its noise. After calling my sister to thank her for dinner, I watched the rearview mirror for a while. Nothing unusual, just our lawn lights softly glowing, the baby monitor's familiar static filling the background. The man's advice lingered in my mind, filed away in that mental space where inexplicable things rest. His words had been delivered like a casual weather report, mildly unnerving. The next morning, I checked the dash cam footage, something I hadn't done in years. Technology had made memories more complicated. The recording showed our arrival at the station, but something was off. Where the strange dot had been beside us, only one clean frame remained. The cloud-reflected pump lights at the lot's edge, and the timestamps jumped unnaturally. My phone's files behaved similarly. The photo of Eli eating crackers had station metadata, but the preview froze momentarily before continuing as if nothing had happened. I considered calling someone official, maybe investigating what the man had hinted at. But with my family in the car, I chose the path of least resistance. So I made coffee, drove Eli to school, and went to work. I did what men my age do, pretend the world is predictable. I answered emails, watched people change travel plans, filed paperwork. During lunch, I walked past the station without a second thought. Just another routine trip for gum or a sandwich. It hummed with the same light as always. Orange cones were set off to one side, a board flapping with letters warning of bridge work. Inside, I asked the attendant about the sign. He shrugged, saying folks always put up signs to be careful. He knew nothing about the men in suits, and no one else had seen them. I still had the clip saved on a backup drive, returning to that brief, quiet hole in the footage like touching an old bruise to see where it hurts. Those men remain a mystery. Their purpose, their allegiance, their intentions. I can't explain the dot that tracked our movements or how it seemed to anticipate our turns. Our choices that night were cautious. We took the ridge, avoided the lowlands, didn't stop to investigate. These decisions kept us from being stranded in a washed-out culvert or encountering someone who might have revealed something. We made it home. Eli drew a picture of a car with headlights and a star, which went up on the fridge. On clear nights, I stare at the lowland stretch, wondering about the unseen. Those people in tidy suits with quiet voices always keep something hidden in the margins. The man at the pump lingers in my memory like a small warning, the kind that makes you take the long way for no reason you can name. I was on the deck when the dog went still. Not barking, but holding his breath, head up, ears rigid. I've known him long enough to trust his instincts, so I followed his gaze past the maple and power lines into the sky. My name is Ben Morales. I live where town edges out and the Milky Way becomes visible on good nights. I'm not an astronomer. I work at the library and enjoy clear evenings with a Dobsonian telescope and a thermos of coffee. That night, the air was sharp, cold enough to make glass feel heavy. The dew point had dropped, stars looking hard and clean. I was aimed near Cassiopeia, revisiting a double star from years past. At first, it looked like a misplaced star, a bright point moving faster than any aircraft. Then it did something impossible. It skipped. Not a smooth curve, not a satellite steady line, but a literal hop. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. The object moved in sharp, precise jumps across the sky, not blazing or leaving a trail. More like someone was animating a dot on a screen. Meteors, rocket launches, helicopters. This was different. I grabbed my phone and aimed the scope's red dot to run the tracking app. The app showed the same strange behavior. A tiny blip hopping around, disappearing and reappearing. Recording seemed the right thing to do. Proof, and a way to review without the adrenaline clouding my memory. The camera hummed, the mount steady, and the object pattern. For about 8 minutes, it moved in these unnatural jumps. Then it vanished. Not fading, not accelerating, but as if someone simply deleted a frame. One moment it was there, jumping across the sky. The next, nothing. Just an empty, ordinary patch where it had been. On playback, the starfield looked wrong. A soft white haze covered the area. The recording app flagged a frame drop, though my laptop insisted the file was intact. I knew better. Claire from the astronomy club was my first call. She listened intently when I replayed the clip. "That's not a meteor," she said. Her version of being unsettled. Things got stranger. A blank text from an unknown number. The old car radio scratching like a stuck record. Coincidence, I told myself. Glitchy electronics. Claire laughed when I explained, telling me not to lose sleep. 2 days later, the pattern intensified. The cloud video had a single white frame where the object vanished. My backup SD card reported a bad sector during transfer. Something was happening and I couldn't shake the feeling it was more than just technical glitches. A dark sedan had been parked a little too long at the end of my street that afternoon. 2 men inside, wearing suits so neat, they looked almost rehearsed, watched the house. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, pretending to admire the weather, the standard move when you notice strangers in anonymous fleet cars. Claire had earlier attempted to check a RAW file on her computer, but the folder closed with no read permissions. An odd phrase from someone who typically navigates digital spaces with ease. When I went to the mailbox later, neighborhood small talk revealed nothing. Mrs. Halpert, who lived across the street longer than most, just shrugged. "Maybe delivery," she said, able to sense when someone's making something up. 2 days after the car incident, a knock came. I told myself not to answer, to be careful, to call Claire or the police if anyone suspicious showed up. But the man on my porch wasn't what I'd imagined. Small, clean-faced, wearing a dark suit that didn't quite fit our town. He held his hands carefully, like he was respecting the weather itself. His shoes looked untouched by gravel, his jacket buttoned, no hat. "Mr. Bell Morales?" he asked, his voice level with an accent I couldn't place. "That's me," I responded. His smile wasn't friendly. When he asked to come in, I refused, directing him to the porch where the dog could see him. The dog gave him one look and relaxed. Animals can be unreliable judges of uniforms sometimes. He didn't introduce himself. Instead, he partially withdrew a thin business card from his inner pocket, a gesture that suggested he might or might not share it. "I won't take up much time," he said. "I represent parties that monitor certain aerial phenomena. If someone had presented me with 100 possible scenarios, this wouldn't have been among them." I sat there wondering who he was, this man who spoke with such measured calm. His eyes, the color of old pennies, seemed to hold more weight than his words. He'd arrived unannounced, claiming to work independently, just advising, a term he delivered as clinically as a weather report. "Certain things are better left uncharted, Mr. Morales," he had said. He didn't ask for my footage. No demands for the memory card, no request to delete files. Just a simple, chilling directive. You saw something, that's all anyone had to do. Make a note and move on. When I pressed him about who he represented, he smiled. Not with warmth, but with a kind of detached certainty. You've done well to bring this to attention, he told me. Leave it at that. His approach was unsettling precisely because it wasn't dramatic. No mentions of national security or scientific hazards, just a calm expectation that I would comply. He stayed just long enough to be polite and just short enough to be deeply unsettling. After he walked away with precise, almost mechanical movements, I called Claire. Her voice shrank when I recounted the encounter. He didn't ask for the data, didn't touch anything. I confirmed his only instruction was to leave it. Her response was immediate. Log everything. Keep copies off-site. Don't go looking for this again. The rest of my afternoon felt suspended, like the moment after something significant happens but you're not quite sure what. I duplicated my original footage in 2 locations, as if multiple copies could somehow protect me from whatever had just occurred. In the following nights, I found myself watching the sky differently, not searching for the object, but watching to see who might be watching. By the time our observatory meeting arrived that Friday, the group was split. Some wanted to discuss the Leonids and the new Mount Clare observation, while others were clearly waiting to hear about my strange encounter. The dog, seemingly unaware of the tension, had gone back to sleep. White frame. A name whispered in a group chat. Cryptic, like a half-told story. Work continued as normal. I shelved books, made coffee, tried to count things that made sense, but something had shifted. Sometimes, twice a week now, I walk the dog toward town's edge, where lights grow sparse. I look up, watching sky pockets. The telescope stays put, unused as it once was. The town feels watched, like a library with one book someone keeps reading and replacing. When someone tells you not to look, that's exactly what you want to do. The urge becomes irresistible. The man in the suit never returned. No sedan parked at my street's end again, but the video still holds that white frame when I scrub through it. Claire says it's the kind of data that would keep scientists awake for months. The man on my porch had warned me to leave some things uncharted. I don't know why he chose to warn me or who he represented. One thing I know, the sky behaved in a way I didn't understand, and suddenly I felt smaller than the questions swirling in my mind. The roof was my refuge, the only place without diesel and cold plastic smell. We load big orders at night, washing machines, fridges, and when the last pallet was strapped down, I told Tommy I was taking my break up top. He laughed, calling me Rooftop Marcus like it was an old joke, a cheap folding chair. A loose cable to hook your foot under against the wind, a view that made the whole facility look tiny. Sodium streetlights on Route 7. Neon from the 24-hour diner. The dark interstate mouth where headlights flowed like a river. Late October. Cold air. I trusted people who offered advice, then quickly changed the subject. I don't believe in grand conspiracies. I don't collect stories to prove anything. Just kept my reportings, receipts, and visit notes in a locked box. A backup at Claire's place promised to be stored in an off-site locker. I don't know if the man was right, but the sky's mystery lingered. The night was cold with a flat, matte grey sky and low cloud cover. My hands felt restless. I hadn't smoked in months, but something about the moment made me want to fidget. 2 hours into my 12-hour shift, the industrial park hummed its usual quiet rhythm when I spotted the light. At first, I mistook it for a helicopter near the freight yard. Red beacons are common out here, but this was different. A single, steady, blue-white point hung motionless about 30 or 40 feet above the loading docks, so low you could almost touch it with a broom handle. Its brightness was strange, casting no real shadow, like a tiny moon suspended in mid-air. I did what anyone would do now, pulled out my phone and started filming. The video captured just a few seconds before something bizarre happened. The light didn't slowly drift or descend. It darted 3 quick, jerky movements like someone tapping a marble along a string, and then vanished beyond the tree line. No sound, no temperature change, just gone. Afterward, I sat frozen, half expecting it to reappear. The roof's ladder rattled, breaking my trance. Gary from receiving climbed up, looking wired from too much coffee. When I described what I'd seen, he nodded dismissively, suggesting maybe it was a drone or a billboard reflection. Downstairs, old Pete in the security booth was muttering about a power blip at Dock 3. The forklift operators joked about the facility being haunted. It was the kind of casual, dismissive chatter that happens at 3 a.m. after something unexplainable. Later, I tried showing Tommy the clip, but nothing worked. The thumbnail existed, but tapping it crashed the app. When I connected my phone to the computer to retrieve the file, the drive wouldn't even mount. Something was off, but no one seemed to care. At that point, my question felt small and foolish. The camera footage failed like another piece of the story being stripped away. When I walked into the office the next morning, I watched the security screen with the supervisor as the log jumped through the night's timeline. Dock 3 revealed a 10-minute outage exactly during my earlier visit. Even the cheap Skylight camera's upload showed a clean break, a blank stretch, where the timestamp simply vanished and then reappeared. Pete mentioned noticing a console glitch at 2:47 a.m., believing the city might have tripped a line. The supervisor brushed it off as an old relay issue, redirecting to paperwork. I mentally filed it under gremlins and went for another coffee. Later that evening, while sliding a shrink-wrapped fridge into position, the main line's lights flickered, not like a storm, but with that hollow movie-style dimming that lasts just half a breath. Dock radio stuttered momentarily before returning to normal. Tommy complained about losing his playlist, and the barcode scanner hissed briefly before resetting. Forklifts ran their diagnostic beeps. We continued working, but a quiet tension lingered. Everyone seemed to have witnessed something unspoken, something they didn't want management to hear about. All night, I kept thinking about the darting light, the vanished file, the camera's unexplained gap. During my half-hour break before midnight, I felt drawn back to the roof. I wanted to catch something that wouldn't disappear when we looked away. The ladder was up again, and the cold hit me hard. Standing there, watching my breath curl, the facility below looked like an isolated island. A strange hum hung in the air, a low metallic note that made the chair vibrate whenever a semi passed on Route 7. I didn't see any light that night. I just sat, listened, and watched the chain-link fence. A ridiculous feeling crept in that by trying to capture something, I wanted to be seen. Maybe it was just a maintenance drone, I thought. Maybe my cheap phone had simply corrupted the file. I told myself I was done with this rooftop investigation, the same way I'd told myself before, right up until the moment I couldn't let it go. At 3:10 a.m., the warehouse line broke the silence. In the office, only one telephone connects to a bank of lines. When it rings, everyone turns. It's usually the delivery company or procurement about a manifest. Tonight, the supervisor answered since the boss was absent. She wore the headset, casually working through an invoice when her expression changed. She slid the handset toward me. "Marcus, it's for you," she said. My hand trembled slightly as I took the call. The voice was low and measured, sounding like it had been carefully refined. No accent, just deliberate words. "Mr. Hale," he said, using my full name in a way that discouraged interruption. "Don't stay on the roof after dark." It wasn't a request, but a directive, delivered with an almost paternal tone of caution. No introduction, no official identification, just a clear instruction. I asked who was speaking, a reflexive challenge to someone giving orders. A soft click, like a cigarette being licked, punctuated the silence. He responded as if my question were unnecessary. We watched the property. Staying off the roof after dark was for my safety and everyone else's. His tone wasn't threatening, but it carried weight. The calm confidence suggested someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Who are you?" I pressed. "What roof?" He repeated his warning with an unsettling patience that made my skin prickle. "Leave the roof to professionals." Then, almost as an afterthought, "And don't try to record again." The office hummed with typical night shift ambience. My supervisor cleared her throat, but kept her distance. I stared at the desk, at a coffee ring left by someone's mug. "Is this the sheriff?" I asked, hoping for an official explanation that would let me return to normalcy. "No," he replied simply. "Good night, Mr. Solve, Hale." Then silence. The clock read 3:14 a.m. when I set down the handset. Security monitors flickered with grainy live feeds, showing nothing unusual. A sudden certainty gripped me. The man who called had been standing between Dock 3 and the roof when I filmed. No proof existed. When I asked Pete about the cameras during the outage, he just shrugged. His console had flashed, but the log had sorted itself. Tommy made a joke about roof patrol, like he was holding something back. We laughed. That nervous laughter that keeps strange things at bay. Driving home that night, I kept my headlights burning through the back roads, moving slower than usual. The man's call hadn't been like some dramatic TV confrontation. He simply told me not to be there, and somehow that was enough. I tucked the phone into the glove box, never pulling the clip back up. Something about the way he used my name, like he knew me, made me obey. Maybe it was the missing footage, the camera gap, the power blip that had blended into one unexplained moment. Now, the roof is closed after midnight. A supervisor's note on the bulletin board declares it off limits, citing employee protection. No explanation about who called or why. Pete's console shows no other gaps. Tommy keeps quiet. I still think about that small light, how it didn't cast shadows like a normal beam. My phone stays in my pocket. I haven't filmed from the roof since. In the break room, skylights look like blinking eyes. At the end of each shift, I step out into the cold and glance up at the roof before turning onto Route 7. What prompted that call remains a mystery, and I'm not brave enough to dig deeper. We were driving back from my sister's place in Lebanon, Missouri. Late near midnight, with empty roads stretching beyond the small towns, Aaron, my wife, dozed in the passenger seat. The radio played low, just enough to keep me alert. The radio started acting strange somewhere past Conway. Static crackled through initially, which seemed normal enough, but then voices began mixing in flat, monotone sounds like an old intercom transmission. Single words drifted through, disconnected, and weird. Aaron stirred when I turned up the volume. "What's that?" she mumbled. "Radio's acting up," I said casually. The broadcast cut to dead air for a second before returning. Voices now louder and overlapping, as if two people were speaking simultaneously. She sat up, peering out the window. That's creepy. My hand was reaching to switch it off when the headlights revealed something ahead. A dark sedan sat angled on the shoulder. No hazard lights, no signs of trouble. Two men in black suits stood beside it, not frantically signaling for help, but moving with deliberate, slow motions. One raised his arm, palm out, gesturing for us to stop. I slowed but didn't halt completely. Something felt off. No official markers, no cones, no flashing lights, no other vehicles. Aaron whispered urgently, "Don't stop." Their stance was unnerving, too still, too symmetrical. Black fedoras pulled low over their faces. They turned in perfect synchronization to watch us pass, heads moving smoothly. The radio hissed again. A voice cut through clearly, "Do not continue." Then more garbled noise. I kept driving. Aaron twisted around, trying to get a final glimpse, but the road's curve swallowed them quickly. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the rear-view mirror, blindingly white and impossibly close. "Is that them?" Aaron's voice was tight with tension. "I don't know," I responded, pressing forward into the night. We were driving between Conway and Marshfield when things started getting weird. The headlights behind us stayed exactly the same distance back, no matter how I adjusted my speed. The radio was dead, with just a faint static and occasional bursts of flat voices that sounded like a conversation we weren't meant to hear. Aaron tried to turn the radio off, but the knob wouldn't budge. I tried too, but nothing worked. The dial was completely frozen. We were still 10 miles from Marshfield, and I decided to wait until we reached more populated areas before doing anything drastic. Then the headlights behind us shifted slightly, seeming to line up perfectly in our lane. They weren't passing, just following us exactly. A couple miles later, Aaron suddenly said, "They're gone." I checked the mirror. The road was empty. Looking out the back window confirmed it. No tail lights, no reflection. It was like they'd vanished. The radio went completely silent then, as if someone had cut the power. When it came back, it was just my original station playing a country song. We didn't talk much after that. Reaching Marshfield felt like a relief, with a few other cars now on the road, making us feel less isolated. We pulled into a gas station to catch our breath. When I shut off the car, the radio made one final burst of static. Underneath, I swear, I heard that same slow, monotone voice say, "Prosa." Aaron heard it too, nodding slowly. We don't drive that stretch of road between Conway and Marshfield anymore. 3 nights into my photography trip, I was set up on an old folding stool with my camera on a tripod. The Milky Way stretched like a pale river over the valley. The day's heat had faded, but the ground still carried a faint scent of sun and dust. I'd driven 3 hours down 2-lane roads to escape civilization. Only a distant tower's red blink and the highway's eastern glow broke the darkness. I was doing long exposures, 30 seconds to a minute, stacking frames to capture the galaxy's underside as it arced into the desert. That's when I noticed the distortion. Before seeing anything that might be a craft, the air itself seemed to ripple. The stars smeared sideways for a fraction of a second, similar to heat shimmer I'd seen on summer car hoods, but different. The desert stretched out, silent and vast. At midnight, I switched to live view and zoomed toward the horizon. Something was off. The pixels pulsed, and the ground looked like an oil slick shimmer across asphalt. An angular dark edge appeared against the warped sky, too clean to be a cloud. It hovered low, half hidden by distortion, a shape that didn't cast light and moved nothing like a bird or plane. I set the camera to a 3-minute exposure and sat motionless. Out here, the desert reminds you how insignificant you are. Each breath matched the shutter's click. The first exposure revealed a black slab in the lower third, with a smear where the distortion had been. Scrolling through the raw file, I found it again in the frame before it vanished, an outline with hard corners like a triangle's back, wrapped in rippling air. I half joked to myself about finding something worth printing. No phone signal out here was intentional, no streaming, no posting. I backed up a few frames to my small SSD and sat with a thermos, watching the sky wheel overhead. An odd quiet hung around me, as if the desert itself held its breath. 2 ridges down, the Jeep's dome light flickered on and off when the guy I'd seen earlier returned to his truck. For a moment, everything felt normal, like dark places where nothing dramatic ever happens. I reminded myself to be careful about what I said out loud. When you're alone in such a wide, empty space, someone's idea of careful shifts. I looped my camera strap through my belt and checked the battery repeatedly. The second exposure showed nothing, but the first file sat on the drive, looking ridiculous in daylight. Just a smear with geometry like a child's kite drawing. Zooming in and adjusting raw sliders, I tried to determine if it was lens flare. The edges kept changing, sometimes smooth, sometimes faceted, always wrapped in that same strange jitter. Sleep was elusive. Around 3 a.m., while repacking a lens, a truck rattled up behind my camp. Headlights stopped on the shoulder, beams dying. I froze. Cars don't usually appear here in the middle of the night. The engine idled, then stopped. Someone exited the cab. Gravel crunched under steps. Metal plinked softly. A low, conversational voice called out, "Photographer." 2 men stepped into the small circle of light from my camp lantern, their movements deliberate and controlled. Dark suits clung to them, tailored so precisely they seemed designed to blend in rather than stand out. No badges flashed, no official ID announced their presence. One was tall and lean, his face sculpted with deep shadows like a crumpled map. The other was shorter, softer, around the middle, carrying himself with a practiced calmness. "Mr. Rivera," the thinner man said, no introduction preceding his words. I froze, my throat going dry. I hadn't told anyone my name, hadn't seen another soul on the dirt road all day. "National Security Review," he added, the words hanging between us like a statement and a command. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Hands loose at his sides, he made no move to show credentials. I felt slightly ridiculous, recalling all those conspiracy forums about mysterious government agents. "You want to see my pictures?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The shorter man was already unfolding a slim tablet from a leather case, as if my response was anticipated. "We'd like to review your work," he said. His tone was low, the kind used in rooms where shouting was never necessary. "For everyone's safety, Mr. Necessary. For everyone's safety, Mr. Badowner. Rivera, we need to examine the files. We want to determine if there's a hazard and bring in appropriate resources, if needed." The word hazard rolled off his tongue with the practiced ease of someone who used it frequently. He closed the tablet and waited, his expectation clear. I would hand over the SSD, and everything would proceed smoothly. My instincts screamed no, but my chest felt like a slow, nervous drumbeat. The desert suddenly seemed too confining, too small. "Do you have ID?" I asked. "What agency?" "We're federal," the thin man replied. "Special review team. We don't want to create alarm. There's nothing for the public to worry about. We're simply asking to look at your images. If you prefer, we can take a copy with your permission." The leather case hung between us, flat like a plate. Permission settled in the air, heavy and final. I wanted to drive all the way back to the highway, find the first diner, and just stop. But another part of me was drawn to the claim. Was this relief disguised as a demand? Something not for the public to worry about. "Do you have any credentials?" I asked. "A card? A number I can call?" The thin man's response was a silent opening and closing of his mouth. For a moment I thought he might pull out a badge. He didn't. "We can go through proper channels," he said. "But time is limited. If you let us review now, it'll speed things up. Later, I'd recall 100 small, stupid actions I could have taken, demanding 2 forms of ID, checking their identification in the lantern's light, calling the non-emergency line to verify a team's dispatch, refusing and locking the SSD in my glove box, but I did none of these. Instead, I offered to show them a single frame on my camera's tiny screen. They leaned in together, as quiet as churchgoers studying a painting. The file revealed the smear again, its dark faced edge wrapped in a shimmer. The thin man's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. Interesting, he said. Not that's it, or that's nothing. But a watchmaker saying something about a movement. Are you going to take my card? I finally asked. Not right now, the smaller man replied. He pressed a thin slip of paper into my palm. Call this number tomorrow morning. We'll coordinate a review if there's... His handwriting was neat and anonymous. A central office line, no name, no extension. They retreated to their truck, sat under its dark hood for a minute, then slowly drove away. The dust settled as if someone had placed a lid on the landscape. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed up thermos half full, SSD wrapped in a plastic bag within my camera bag. I couldn't shake the feeling I'd encounter them again around the next bend. By midday, I called the number. Disconnected. When I later reviewed the files on my big monitor at home, several frames were simply gone, not corrupted. Just absent. The raw folder contained blanks where files should have been. The images I'd shown them remained, including the one with the outline, but neighboring frames had vanished. I ran checks, determined to be methodical. I'd made copies on the SSD that night, and they seemed fine at first. But a day later, one copy wouldn't mount. Drives fail, files get tricky. Maybe it was just bad luck, or maybe something else was going on. I kept backups everywhere. Printed images, multiple digital copies. Always hedge your bets when you're not sure a file will survive. I thought about sharing a carefully cropped still with my university friend who understands optics, but I didn't. At the coffee shop inside the camera store, people were curious about some parts of my story and dismissive about others. No one said I was wrong to show the frame. No one explained the blank files. The thin man's interesting comment kept replaying in my mind like a half-remembered headline. A week later, a local story emerged about maintenance workers reporting strange lights near a cell tower in the next county. The accounts were vague. Just a flash, a shimmer, nothing concrete. I sent an anonymous link to my university friend, asking about refracted air and sensor artifacts. He noted the raw image's edges looked inconsistent with typical lens flare. He promised to investigate further, but he didn't. His thesis defense consumed him, and then life moved on. I'm carrying a slip of paper in my wallet, wedged between a motel business card and a diner receipt. The number still doesn't connect. A month later, I returned to the desert. Same location, clear nights, the Milky Way exactly as before. I watched the horizon, waiting. Nothing appeared in the frames like that previous moment. But I kept shooting, long exposures, quick shots, just to keep my hands busy. I distributed the original frame carefully, one copy for myself, another in a fireproof bank box, a third with my gallery friend. He quietly asked if anyone from National Security wanted the images. We didn't discuss it further. I didn't share the raw files that night, and I haven't heard from those men again. I'm unsure whether that makes me lucky or naive. The image remains on my drive. Some surrounding frames have vanished. When I look at that pixel smear, I'm left with more questions than answers. I was driving home from my sister's place along County Route 9 when something caught my eye. Against the thinning blue of the tree line to my right, a dark shape moved slowly, like a ragged cloud being dragged across the tops of the maples. No lights, no sound. At first, I thought it was just a tarp caught in a branch, but then it slipped higher, and for a moment, I could have sworn it had an edge, a pale underside, like fabric caught in lamplight. My name's Jenna, and I live just outside of Millerfield. These weeknight drives home are familiar to me, and you learn to slow down when something feels off on a two-lane road. The truck that had been tailing me at a distance nudged closer, then backed off. Other cars seemed to vanish or drift far away. My headlights carved neat rectangles into the shoulder, and the thing above the trees kept drifting almost like it was reading the road alongside me. I pulled off by the old berry farm, where a bent sign and an old stone wall marked a lay-by. The car's radio was tuned to dead static, something I only noticed after the engine ticked over. Silence pressed in, broken only by my own breathing. The shape moved eastward, sliding along the edge of the woods. A flock of starlings lifted from a telephone wire and settled again, completely undisturbed. No scattered panic, no alarm calls. That struck me more than the strange object itself. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone, because that's what everyone does now. The camera app opened, but the viewfinder showed only a flat grey. The autofocus hunted frantically, finding nothing steady. The timestamp was correct, and my photo folder now contained yesterday's pictures and a blank new thumbnail. I laughed. A short, nervous sound that seemed too loud in the quiet. When I looked back, a sedan was idling farther down the lane, lights off. Its grille caught the last of the dusk like a pair of eyes. It was a black that stands out in a place where cars are usually older and beige. Not just black, but that smooth, deep factory black. The windows were darker than legally allowed. The dark sedan followed me with an eerie precision. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. The driver kept a consistent distance, always 2 car lengths behind, moving exactly as I moved. My mirrors reflected the same black rectangle each time I checked. Something felt off. My phone's signal dropped suddenly, from 3 bars to 0 in seconds. The GPS spinning wheel replaced the comforting blue navigation line. This small technical glitch unsettled me more than I could explain. I took the slower route through town, passing the diner and the single blinking red light. I hoped the car might turn off onto a side street or pull into the gas station, but it didn't. The driver remained patient, like a shadow learning to match my pace perfectly. At the intersection of Main, another car spun its wheels and passed through. The black sedan slowed but didn't advance. I could see nothing inside, no face, no movement. When the light turned green, I straightened my wheel and drove. Checking the rearview mirror confirmed the dark mass remained exactly where it had been. I tried turning down Maple Avenue to see if the car would pass. It didn't. I turned up the classical radio station, hoping to break the tension. The string quartet played briefly before the music suddenly became distorted. One channel silent, another drifting like a ghost through the passenger window. Near Miller's Field, where newer houses lined a street with weak lighting, I turned toward the high school. The parking lot circle of lamps offered a sense of civilization. The sedan maintained its precise distance. For a moment, I considered stopping on the shoulder to confront whatever was happening, but I imagined how that would sound when telling others, how it would seem less rational, less believable. Some practical part of me held back. I stepped out of my car, under the harsh floodlight of the Walgreens on Oak, my phone clutched tightly in my fist. The night felt heavy, pressing down like a lid. The sedan pulled into the lot, parking behind a delivery truck with an odd sense of deliberate placement. When I emerged from the store, paper bag in hand, the car remained. 2 men in dark coats materialized, moving with the synchronized precision of trained professionals. No hats, no backpacks, just a practiced silence reminiscent of movie scenes. One man, perhaps in his 40s, looked directly at me. Short hair, clean-shaven, wearing an expensive suit that showed no sign of wrinkling. The other man's face was turned away, but his jawline spoke of a hardened intensity. The first man caught my eye briefly, offering a small, polite nod, not unfriendly, but not warm either. "Everything okay?" he asked. His voice as casual as someone chatting in a grocery store checkout line. The tone suggested a routine check-in. "I'm fine," I responded, "just heading home." He tilted his head slightly, like someone reading an invisible map. "Keep to the main roads tonight," he advised. "Avoid the ridge if you can." The instruction carried the weight of an officer's directive, though no uniform backed his words. Ironically, I rarely drove the ridge at night, yet I had been planning to do exactly that. It was shorter, prettier, a road that curled along the hollow, offering a full view of the valley on clear nights. I convinced myself his advice was simply helpful and well-intentioned. We stood bathed in the Walgreens sign's glow, looking like strangers who had casually crossed paths. His eyes were the color of old coins, unremarkable yet somehow memorable. In that moment, I realized I didn't know his name, and more importantly, I didn't need to. The sedan waited silently behind us. Windows were closed. The air conditioning hummed quietly. A trash truck rumbled down Oak Street, its compactor grinding, filling the small space between us with a reminder that life continues. I drove off the lot, making a slow right toward the highway instead of the left that would have taken me up the ridge. A black sedan eased out behind me, following at a distance. As I approached Route 22, the car turned down a side street with such quiet resolution that I realized it wasn't pursuing me, just observing my choice. Something about its disappearance unsettled me. At home, the house felt too bright when I turned on the porch light. Eli, my neighbor's kid, sat on his porch with a bike, a dog, and a face full of late-night cereal breath. I said hello, my hand resting on the screen door like a protective charm. Inside, I locked the deadbolt and settled on the couch, the television casting an ordinary light across the room. Later, I told my sister about the incident in fragmented pieces, a shape over the trees, a glitching phone, a black car following. She urged me to contact the police or sheriff, but I hesitated. They would demand details, a location, a license plate, proof. All I had was a blurry image and a polite man's advice to stick to main roads. Days passed. Newscasters remained silent. The Berryfield farmer visited, bringing a crate of strawberries. When I shared my story, he laughed. A laugh that simultaneously humored me and warned me to be cautious. My phone returned to normal, the photo folder still holding that blank thumbnail I couldn't bring myself to delete. Sometimes I stare at the grey, trying to recall the edge of something in the trees. A small, steady feeling lingered beneath my skin, like a held breath. For a week, I adhered to the main roads, partly due to the man's calm, practical tone, partly out of a strange desire to obey his polite directive. It seemed a minor concession, yet some nights I would still drive up to the ridge, parking at the overlook, more from habit than courage, watching the valley lights spread out below. I remind myself to stay calm about the sky. Eddie Morales, a night fisherman, knows these waters well. On a late September evening, with the river running full and the tide turning, he was out on his skiff when something unusual caught his eye. The lights rose from the water like fishing buoys lifting straight into the sky. At first, he thought it was just a headlamp on a nearby dinghy, but then more appeared, soft, pale blue lights that didn't blink or behave like typical navigation markers. They emerged slowly, steadily, rising to 20 or 30 feet above the water, hovering silently in the low fog. One light broke away, cutting a diagonal path through the mist like a pencil dragging across the landscape. The night was thick with salt and wet rope, humid but not warm, with a soft radio hissing in the console and a thermos of coffee tucked under the bow. Sometimes, memories linger like shadows. These lights left nothing definitive, no broken laws, no dramatic abductions. Just a suggestion, a fleeting moment that could be easily dismissed. Men in sharp coats seemed to be watching, though. Their intentions remained unclear. Now, I lock my doors a little earlier. I take longer routes home on strange nights, looking up at the clear sky and willing myself to see something ordinary. My phone holds a blank thumbnail, a grey space where a picture should be. Was it a warning? A guide? I'm not sure which possibility feels more unsettling. The lights disappeared as quietly as they arrived, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of something just beyond understanding. The night was quiet except for the tide slapping against the breakwater. A school of currents slid off the water like a black hand being pulled away, circling before leaving. Then the lights appeared, pale dots lifting straight up into the fog as if someone had released a net. My fish finder had gone silent, not completely dead, but reduced to a thin flat beep where usually there would be bars and dashes signaling bait and schools. I tried to capture the moment on my phone, which recorded the first few frames before dying dramatically, from 12% to nothing in the time it takes to say, "What the hell?" I laughed, the kind of nervous chuckle you make to keep your head when technology fails you. My hands remained steady on the skiff's controls, though a tightness gripped my chest, the kind that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't exist where it is. Starting the engine, I cut a slow circle through the spot where the lights had been, hoping to stir something up. My line stayed slack, which felt like a bad sign. The fog thickened like soup as I eased back toward the dock. Two men stood by the pilings, dark against the sodium lights. Their suits were so black, they seemed to absorb light itself. One carried a raincoat despite no rain. The other wore shoes with a clean shine that suggested they'd never touched mud. As I gunned the motor in and trimmed the lines, they approached silently. "Good night," I said, "because that's what you say at docks, even when your voice wants to say something more." They stepped forward as if they were already beside me, their presence both sudden and inevitable. 2 measured paces apart, the men stood. Their smiles were calculated, devoid of any genuine warmth. One asked about my late-night presence, both of their gazes drifting back to the water as if we were collectively fixed on a single view. My response was direct. Night runs with the tide just right. My hands moved slowly as I cinched the cleat, the fog wrapping around us and pulling sounds toward the harbor. Conversations here feel intimate despite being out in the open. Lights caught the shorter man's attention. His words carried weight, each syllable carefully considered. He mentioned marine life, his tone deliberate and measured. Something hung in the air between us, a shared understanding or unspoken tension that the misty night seemed to amplify. The harbor breathed around us, dark and watchful. My movements felt deliberate, each action synchronized with the quiet rhythm of the water and the barely perceptible sounds of the night. I apologize, but it seems like the text you intended to share is incomplete. Could you please provide the full original text that you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete context, I can't perform the requested rewriting task.